Well, hello everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine, and welcome to another Rattlecast. It's Rattlecast number 231. Our guest tonight is George David Clark. He'll be with us in about 5 or 10 minutes, but before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, the 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been a continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this. We love poetry and know you do too. So please do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Anything you can do to help spread poetry around the internet would be greatly appreciated. Let's see. So people are already asking what the music is, which we always use, and it's on the YouTube notes if you want to look at it later. It adds it later. It's from their archives. It's called it's by Nat O'Keefe and the Bowties, and it's called "Dude, Where's My Horse?" That's our bumper music. I haven't mentioned that in like a year or two, so there you go for those who just asked. And I love it too. It's a nice medley that they give for free. It's public domain music. So thanks to Nat O'Keefe and the Bowties for sharing that. Now, as always, we'd like to start with our Poet Respond poet. And we have a great one this week. Beneth Goldschmidt-Sauer is here with a sonnet. So here we go. Hi, Beneth. How you doing?
I am great. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So tell us, I love, with the Poet Response series, there's sort of a way that there's certain topics that most of the poems get written about. And I love the unusual topics that we only have like one poem of the whole week written about it. And this was an interesting one about moths. So a science-oriented poem too, which I always love. Tell us how you came across that and how you knew there might be a poem lurking in there.
I'm not sure I knew. I read the article and I was really struck by it because it's something I've always wondered. And as I say in the poem, a friend of mine also wondered. And then, how sometimes when you're driving along, things just sort of coalesce. And I'd had this dream in which the friend had said this thing to me, and it all sort of started to fall in place. So unusually, I should say. It doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, well, it's great when it does. Do you write a lot of sonnets? I'm always looking out for form. I always say I wish people wrote more in form. It's nice to have a good one here. Is that something you usually do?
I like sonnets. I've tried other things. There's something about form that actually makes things easier sometimes because you have something you have to adhere to, and it forces you to think creatively within those boundaries. So tried villanelles and other things, but, they're quite a bit more difficult. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so tell us too, what was in this story, which was from, where was it? From the Guardian. Yeah. What is it that draws moths to flames? What was it that they found? The new hypothesis anyway, or theory they've sort of tested a little bit.
Right. So they proposed that moths were originally, the stars were the brightest thing, and the moths would turn their back to the brightest thing. But now that our world has become so light, it essentially, I think, confuses them. And they fly toward a light, and their back is toward the bulb, and they just spin. They keep going, can't break out of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So kind of just a quirk of nature that just unfolds on itself over and over again now, that the world environment's changed. It's really interesting. Well, let's hear this poem. Why don't you read it? It's Any Kind of Light.
Sure. Any kind of light. Your voice said, "Watch what happens now." And then I woke. Of course it was a dream, for you've been gone for many years. Dead, dead, and dead. But still I wait. For what? An icy sluice, a spurt of flame, or lightning's long arm bent to etch your insignia on my back. Okay, more pain. I thought of you. I read we've learned why moths, you always wondered, bash into light any kind. Why don't they stop? Stop. They can't. For eons, stars were brightest and moths steered clear of sky. But now they drop into the suck of incandescent night. They spin and spin, wings loosening their damp to heat. Now watch what happens, says the lamp.
Yeah, beautiful poem, and such a great extended metaphor there throughout, turning that story into a great metaphor for loss. Thanks so much for sharing that. It's a wonderful poem, and I always do love a sonnet. Thanks for sharing that, Beneth.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, thanks. Take care. Yeah, that was Beneth Goldschmidt-Sauer with Any Kind of Light, Sunday's poem at rattle.com. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to tonight's main guest, George David Clark. So sit tight, and I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Like I said, today's guest is George David Clark. George is the author of Reveille, winner of the Miller-Williams Poetry Prize, and Newly Not Eternal, just released from LSU Press. This beautiful book right here. After earning an MFA from the University of Virginia and a PhD at Texas Tech University, David held the Olive B. O'Connor Fellowship at Poetry at Colgate University, and later the Lilly Postdoctoral Fellowship at Valparaiso University. He's the editor-in-chief of 32 Poems. He previously served in various capacities on the staffs of Meridian, Iron Horse Literary Magazine, and the Best New Poets anthology, so all over the place. I mean, David's been doing so much stuff with poetry throughout the years, so we'll talk about all that. Since 2015, David's taught creative writing and literature at Washington Jefferson College, where he is now an associate professor. He lives in McMurray, Pennsylvania, with his wife, Elisabeth, and their 4 children. And here he is, George David Clark. Hey, David, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see you, Tim.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I've been a fan of your work, and I say that in like a broad spectrum way. I mean, I love 32 Poems, and it's been one of my favorite, probably maybe my favorite print poetry magazine. There's so much affinity in the kind of poems you like or in choose for that magazine in Rattle. So I've been a fan of that, and also a fan of your poetry, which is so intricate and musical. It's just a pleasure to read. Do you want to start with a poem?
That sounds good.
So,
all right, this is...
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, just a few keys is first, is what we had on the list.
Great. Few keys. This is the key to my pickup, and this is the key to my home. The key to my laptop is letters and symbols. My birth date's the key to my phone. I once stole a key to a diary, and once turned a key made of bone. What this key can do, I've forgotten. This key is some other key's clone. This key takes the form of a feather and swings the green doors and the roofs of these oaks. This match is the key to an altar and frees a black serpent of smoke. This key is the bronze in my brown left eye, but what shuddered tonight is unclear. This key is the pitch and the torque of my voice. May it fit in a generous ear. If these coins make a key to the turnpike, the toll booth's a bribable latch. So a vein is impressed by a needle, and hardwood submits to an axe. But you can't coax a mind with an order or force belief loose with a fact. When I've turned, it's the teeth in a bittersweet song, their diligent baffle and scratch. This last key, of course, is a wristwatch. I turn it by sitting stock still, by letting the clouds turn around me, by adding more drinks to my bill. Eventually, everything opens. The blue fist of evening, the maw in these rocks. With a click, it all fastens behind me. This last key is also a lock.
Yeah, and so that was one of the early poems, the first poem after the beginning, A Few Keys from Newly Not Eternal, the new book from LSU Press that's just released by George David Clark. And George, can you tell us a little bit about the theme of the book? How did the book come to be? And how did you know that it was a book with this content? I'm always kind of curious about that.
Yeah, the oldest poems in this book, Tim, are I was looking through them the other day, and somebody asked me a similar question. I think there's a poem in here that's like 14 years old. So back even when I was a doctoral student, some of the first couple of poems in here came together. So I've been working on the poems that are in this collection for I think well over a decade at this point. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe the book found its shape when I wrote this crown of sonnets that maybe we'll get to a little later on, that are a little half crown of sonnets for the son that my wife and I lost in childbirth. So that kind of gave the poem a narrative event at its center, and then I've sort of built the book by gathering other things that seemed in conversation with that event, even though some of the poems preceded it by many years.
Yeah, I love the way that it's structured. The way that really that tragic, heartbreaking story in the ultrasound poems is sort of like a scaffolding that the other poems are laid out across, and it's a really nice way to lay a book out. Did it take you a while to find this form? When you write a crown of sonnets, you'd think that those would all be together in one thing as the center of the book, but then you have them spread out with different poems in between them, which is interesting too.
Yeah, I found that idea, but it was only 7 poems. It's half a crown of sonnets, really. So I was thinking about potentially publishing them as a chapbook, and was thinking about different ways of putting them in conversation with other poems, and nothing quite made sense. It's hard to have like that; those poems come first, and then something else follows it, or something else comes first, and then you've got this series that is it's working as a crown. So I had the idea of just splitting them up a little bit. One poem or 2 poems from the sonnet series. And then a break, and a couple poems that were doing other things, and then to come back to pick up the crown again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
then I just kept that for one of the sections of the book.
Mm-hmm. Let's hear another poem from the book.
Okay. Will you remind me what poem we said, Tim?
Yeah, no problem. It's a Song of the Genie on page 24.
Yeah, maybe something I'll say to introduce this. There's the image on the cover is the 3 fates, and I've got maybe my own versions of the 3 fates in the form of some other archetypes in this book. So there's I lake the drought, I bake flood off again. I make fools rich enough that for a while they fool the rich enough to dictate style. I beautify, I muscle up, I thin, I pheromone, I woo, I violin the mood, I penthouse suite and private aisle, I ease death out of view, but never smile, and only ever last what's always been. The books and movies are confused, of course. It's my warm, time-worn rag that rubs your mind to force the rank wish free. Voracious, blind, and magnetized to bankruptcy, divorce, exhaust fumes primed into a past due Porsche. At last, I'd grant you, but you decline.
Yeah, so you see 2 poems from the book to start out with, and they show really the richness and intricacy of these, and the music too, and the use of things like I violin and I pheromone, those verbification of those words, such a rich style of writing and so much musicality in them. So what drew you, would you say, to writing that style? Is that a way you've always written, or is that something you find yourself more drawn to over the years?
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky question to answer. My first book doesn't sound like that very much at all. They're almost all of the poems in that first collection were free verse, and I write about half the time. I think I write free verse now, but this collection is almost all metered and rhymed. So it's part of the what holds these poems together. I think is that aesthetic bent that you're describing. It's not the only thing I love, but I do really love meter and rhyme. And um, once I start on a poem that has those pleasures, they kind of drive the rest of the poem.
Mm-hmm.
They help me find my way to the end more than anything else. So when I have a line or a gesture or two that starts in that direction, I don't want to turn it off.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that it's hard to switch back and forth between this style and other, more, I guess traditional isn't the right word, but more common styles, maybe you could say?
Yeah, I think that's true, especially with sonnets, because they kind of write themselves. You know where you're going to make your turns and everything. If you write a couple of sonnets in a row, at least for me, it's hard to then turn that off and do something else, um, because the form can be such an easy scaffolding to put the language of the poem on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it can be an unhealthy temptation to have that in the back of my mind as something that I can rely on and not stretch myself to make different kinds of music or to let my mind twist and turn in different ways than a sonnet turns.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take it back to the early days of your poetry career. What was it? Was there a time you knew that poetry was something you'd want to take seriously? And how old were you at that point?
Yeah, when I started college, I thought I was going to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But I had some really unrealistic expectations. I knew I really loved writing. Novels were important to me. It was more fiction than anything else. I thought I'll be a doctor who writes books or something like that. I mean, other than Amit Majmudar and I guess C. Dale Young, that isn't really a thing that people do. Um, and as I moved through my undergraduate experience, I realized I wasn't really that interested in medicine. It just sounded like a good career. I was really interested in stories and poems. And I had a great professor as an undergraduate, Bobby C. Rogers, great teacher and a great poet in his own right, who made poetry seem like a real thing to me. I think in high school, I had a terrible poetry experience. You read Frost, Nothing Gold Can Stay, and Dickinson, A Narrow Fellow in the Grass. And nothing against those poems, but those aren't even in my top 50 favorite Frost or 50 favorite Dickinson poems.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't something that moved me in any way in high school. But in college, I found a professor who took it seriously and obviously loved the things and kind of gave me permission to love them too.
Do you remember the first poem you loved? Was there one you came across in college that you realized was different than the ones you read in high school?
Yeah, it was a series of Bishop poems that we read, and the specific poem for me was The Man Moth. That was just such a strange. I mean, you could never do something like that in a short story, really. It just seemed like a kind of language I'd never encountered before. And it was super exciting and fun, and it's funny and charming and surprising at every turn. I really flipped for The Man Moth. Was the first poem that really did it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear another poem. And next we had ultrasound, your picture. So one of the half crowns we were talking about.
Yeah, this is the first one in that series, and it has an epigraph at the beginning. Henry Thomas Clark, 10/7/2014. We framed an ultrasound of you and Peter holding hands, or almost, in the womb. Your moon bright arms crossed in a black balloon with week and weights and heights in millimeters penciled on the side. We say it's good that he at least was with you when you died, that unlike us, you'll never know the why of being lonely or what naked falsehood feels like in one's mind. You see, it's false to say your death was somehow grace. It's grace that spared Cain's life and later gave Eve other sons despite creation's wastes and faults. Wish you could have known love's aftertastes. I wish you'd had a chance to hate your brother.
Yeah, and so that's a sonnet, not written in a traditional form, though. The shape in the page gives it a lot of white space with the couplets and then the every other line indented. Why did you choose to structure the poem that way? Is there a name for this form?
No, I'm forgetting what the term is. There's an essay that Ahmet Majmudar, who I mentioned earlier, wrote in Literary Matters, where he talks about
I've heard the word
units of meter that are longer than the line. What was that?
Curginated is the word I've heard. A curginated sonnet. Is that possible, or is that just someone else has made up?
That's not the term that Majmudar uses, but I'm willing to call it that. But just a meter that's longer than the line. Mm-hmm. So in these poems, the pentameter unit, it covers 2 lines. Mm-hmm. And I think I at least some of the early drafts of those poems were, they looked like a sonnet on the page, 14 lines as opposed to 28. And they just seemed too clunky to me, I guess, that I wanted to have them maybe to put a little more white space around them. I also wanted to I wanted to take some pressure off of the end rhymes and try to put a little more pressure on some of the rhymes that were getting buried in the middles of the lines. So it was partially a sonic choice too, that I hope that they sound a little bit different, at least on the page. I don't know if you would notice anything hearing them read aloud, but maybe the eye hears some of the internal rhymes differently when they're featured on the end of the half line, rather than if you're just looking at 14 lines of pentameter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting the way, to me, like the line length and the amount of white space is sort of the guidance for how fast to read. So the effect to me, when you have a lot of white space and shorter lines like that, even in a traditional sonnet form, which it is that you get to read the poem slower and sort of luxuriate in the sounds more than you would almost rushing through a sonnet. With a pentameter line is a relatively, I guess mid-size, you'd call it, line. But with that shorter line, you end up going down and going really, really slow. And I think that really adds to the musicality and lets you appreciate it, which is, I think I really enjoyed reading these because of that. Is that how you think of it too? I don't know. I never know. There's so many things in poetry that you don't know if it's like how you encounter a poem individually is the same way as other people do. But to me, that's what it does.
Well, I mean, if that's the effect, I would love for that to be what happens when someone reads one of those poems, Tim. That I do think that it's a rhythmic choice and a choice that's trying to do some different things with the rhyme. I would love for that to be the effect that it has on the page. And you kind of don't know when you're writing it either. You have some vague things in mind about how you're pronouncing it in your head as you're reading the poems. And I tend to read my lines out loud as I'm writing them, but you don't know whether the reader is going to hear the same sort of thing. And it's hard to have a whole lot of confidence about how something like a line break or it's the indention in the second half of the pentameter units, how that's actually going to read in someone else's head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, given this poem, is the person who it's directed to. This poem is written for, toward Henry, the you in the poem. And there's a real intimacy to that because of it. But there's also a sense of maybe being written for Peter, their surviving son, and who, how much of that is in your head as you're writing the poems in this book? Is that something that you're thinking about of your family reading these poems later? And is it addressed, how does the address affect the way the poems come out?
Oh gosh. I think I did have that in mind when I was writing them, how my family might respond. Less so Peter, because it's the time that I think I wrote these maybe 4 years after Henry's death, but Peter was still for himself. He was so young that it was hard to think about him reading them or engaging with them in any way. I was thinking more about, you know, I had in mind this person, Henry, who I was writing to.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also felt like I was kind of writing not just to Henry the person, but like to this abstraction, because he's not a person who I ever met, or, you know, I held his body in my arms, but I never held him or had, you know, he was dead before I held him. And so he's almost like an embodiment of like lost potential or something to me. And I had it in mind, like kind of writing toward that abstraction. But the other person that I was thinking about was my wife, of course, in terms of writing these poems and what she would make of them, and to what degree they could potentially be poems that would hurt her. And I think I convinced myself they wouldn't be, that they would be poems that that honored the hurt that we suffered together. Mm-hmm. But I've shared some of them with Peter since then. Peter's 9 now, so he can read these poems, and he loves that his name is in my book. That means something to him. He can be very moved by conversation of Henry, and we talk about Henry around the dinner table, and you know, it's not something that is like a secret in our house or anything. And I don't know how Peter might feel about these poems as he gets older, but right now he's very sensitive about anything like Henry. He'll ask questions about him. He's interested in the idea they were identical twins, mm-hmm. that Henry would have looked just like him, except for now, like he has some scars and his hair is cut in a certain way, and they might look different now, but essentially they were, you know, they'd be hard to tell apart. He's interested in that, and he can be moved to tears by some of those conversations, but he also initiates them. Yeah. So maybe that's an answer that isn't really an answer. I'm still trying to figure out, mm-hmm. what he's going to make of these poems, and I hope he will feel encouraged by them, even though a couple of them admit to negative feelings that I felt towards Peter, you know, and stupidly, you know, at that time, that I was mad at everybody. You know, I was mad at God and mad at Elisabeth, who was not to blame in any way, and also mad at the child who survived, and myself and my other kids, and anybody you could count. I was mad at them. And I think some of that's acknowledged in the poem, in a way that I hope isn't hurtful to Peter as he gets older.
Yeah, well, to me, I mean, I was just thinking about how, you know, valuable that must be to know, you know, what things are like and what your parents' thoughts are. I think there's a tendency really to hide those kind of stories, you know, from people. Like even myself, I had a half sister that I barely knew about and that we didn't really talk about much. And it took me until I was like in my late 20s to even realize that there was an actual deep psychological thing going on there with that. Like it was something I like thought I never thought of, but it turned out like the thought that just the understanding that there was some absent half sister that was like part of, you know, half related to me, my father's daughter, sort of hung with me in a weird way and changed like the way I interacted in relationships and things like that. And, you know, so those things that we never talk about are so, you know, so, I don't know if scarring is the right word, but they leave an impression. And so having this artifact of what it was like to experience that, and then, you know, and have that openness throughout too, I think it seems to me in the future would be really valuable for Peter.
Well, I hope so. I think there's also the risk that you could talk about it too much, and that he could feel overshadowed by the brother who never did anything wrong or something like that. You know, but our kids will, when we're, you know, praying before the meal or something at dinner, and they'll go around the table and pray for the people sitting with us and everything. They'll include Henry in their prayer. So I don't know quite what to make of that, or what that will mean long term. But yeah, so I don't know that we've got the answers, but we're trying to figure it out with the kids.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, like so many things we can only guess and try to hope and maybe adjust along the way. But it seems to me that openness is the key to so much, you know, health, you know, mentally, health-wise. So it just seems great to be that open about it. Let's hear the other poem, another ultrasound poem you're going to read, which was Urn, or Your Urn, I should say. It's on page 45.
And this one's got a lot of Peter in it. Yeah. Ultrasound your urn. Tonight, Pete's teething on your mom's Bluetooth. He found the scissors to derange his hair. We've left the gate down and he's on the stairs, or else he's scrambled up a dollhouse roof. The crumpled books and cracker crumbs are proof he's loose. Disordered blocks, toppled chair. Some days he's absolutely everywhere until I wish him gone, to tell the truth. Not you. You stay exactly as you're left. The tame and quiet twin. The easy one. The boy who never makes a mess. The son whose whispered name will be our shibboleth for innocence. Whose only fault is done. Who never cries or fights or takes a breath.
Yeah, another strong poem. That was Ultrasound Your Urn from this book, Newly Not Eternal, the new book from George David Clark. And I just love, I mean, if everything that I love about form in poetry might be summed up in this great line: he's loose, disordered, blocks a toppled chair. Some days he's absolutely everywhere. It's such a great description, and the way that the rhyming and the meter make the poem, you know, that line, that image seems so true. You know, I mean, that's like the miracle that that metrical, you know, formal poetry can do right there. When were you introduced to formal poetry? Was it something that you know, a lot of people, you know, go through MFA programs without even, you know, doing any kind of scansion or any kind of, you know, work on meter. Did you have a professor that turned you on to it, or was it something you found yourself?
That first professor that I studied with, he writes in a long kind of C.K. Williams style line that's so long it breaks the right margin. There was some conversation about form in that class. I think there was, you know, a week in the introduction to creative writing class where you had to write a sonnet or something like that. But I wasn't very interested. I wrote only in free verse. I think, but with maybe one or two exceptions, in those, you know, because someone was requiring me to do it for an assignment. All through the MFA, and it's the MFA program that I went to. All of the faculty wrote free verse. There was another student in the program at the time who was writing some in meter, but that was about it. And I wasn't very interested in it then. But I started reading more poems in traditional forms by the time I graduated, and I felt like rhythm, especially, was a real deficit in my work. That I just didn't have a good ear for it, and that it seemed like even if I was, you know, I wasn't planning to write in form, but I felt like even as a free verse poet, I needed better command of rhythm. And so when I was looking for a PhD program, I was consciously searching for someone who was writing in form and could help develop that side of my ear, even if it never meant that I wrote a poem in meter myself. That I felt like that was something I really needed to learn. And it was maybe the biggest part of why I went to Texas Tech was to study with John Poach, whose work I really admired in form. He was also a Christian, and that was attractive to me too. Someone who was interested in writing about faith, which is another one of my obsessions. So those things were kind of tied together. Somebody who was going to develop my ear and help shape some of the work I was trying to do on that thematic note. Yeah.
Tell me more about your faith and how that ties into poetry. Because it's one thing, we had a Poets of Faith issue, you know, maybe 8 years ago or so. And, you know, it's rare that poets are openly, you know, spiritual in that way, in the way of organized religion. And, you know, that Poets of Faith issue came out, you know, it was enough of a rarity that you could have a sort of issue just devoted to that. And then we had a lot of backlash. People, you know, some people were upset about, you know, all these different religions, and I get a lot of hate mail, actually. One of the first of many, you know, many rounds of hate mail over the years was because, you know, who wants to look at these poems about Jesus or whatever. And it's strange to me too, given how, you know, there's an entire world, you know, of the United States and the world itself, that faith is really a central aspect. Why do you think that religion doesn't come into play in poetry more often? And also, how does it inform your poetry? You know, to me, poetry, you know, poems seem kind of like prayers. Does it have that place within your, you know, your life?
Yeah, I don't think all poems are prayers, or not all of mine are prayers, but some of them are, and maybe even some of the best ones are. I think, I mean, I'm hoping that however superficial the first like lines or images of a poem are for me, I think my hope is always that the poem's going to get as deep as possible. And the deeper things go, the closer they're going to get to some sort of spiritual conversation. So maybe I mean, that could even be a danger to my poems, is that because I know that's the deepest part of my own sense of the nature of reality, that it's easy to let a poem lead me there. So it might be something that I resist. And I've felt that as an editor too. You know, as you said, I mean, it's not something that you see an awful lot of in contemporary American poetry. And yet I'll frequently find myself with like, we're only going to publish 32 poems in an issue, and I'm 20 poems in, and 6 of them have something to do with faith, right? Even if they're antagonistic towards faith or something like that, that the spiritual conversation is really attractive and interesting to me. And I have to kind of rein things in a little bit. All right, no more of those kinds of poems for this next issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, it ties to me into the main question of why we're writing poems at all, which is like, why are we here? I mean, it's sort of like almost every poem can be seen almost as a spiritual journey in that way, and that we're trying to figure out like what the meaning of this existence is, and whatever we land on or find within the poem, it still feels to me spiritual almost. It's rare that it's not. I mean, some poems maybe in the light verse area or aiming for humor maybe, and there's some other poems doing some other things, political poems or maybe a different beast too. But a lot of the poems just seem to be aimed in that direction, even if not in any kind of direct way, but it's still a central part of poetry, I'd say.
Yeah, and I mean that's true for me. I mean, I've written lighter poems. I write love poems and many other things too. But often when I'm trying to figure out what something means, I mean that's a big part of my imagination, is that's the meaning that I find in my faith.
Well, let's read another poem, and next we have Postcard from Home.
Yeah. Postcard from Home. The birds in our county were bees, and the bees were rough nuggets of light. The green ponds we soaked in were trees, and the thunderheads' bellies were white. The sky was a bowl of pink grapefruit. Your house was all threshold and eaves. When a distance consumed and erased you, the kudzu here sputtered and seethed. Remember June's scorchy pervasions, that chill only sweat can achieve? The fires at our feet were impatience. Through the legs of our shorts ran a breeze. Wherever your luster has blown to, wherever your ebbing proceeds, there's our hollow that's filled you and known you, this nowhere that saunters and preens. In the sunflower's eye stands a hornet. In the stray's empty socket, a flea. In a brilliance where vision is forfeit, my eye lays its hand on your knee.
And that was Postcard from Home, another poem from the new book from LSU Press, Newly Not Eternal, by George David Clark. One of the things that happens to me if I'm writing a lot of form is you sort of get stuck in the music of it, and that it becomes sort of overpowering a little bit. And it's so easy because of the way I think our brains operate. They're sort of like a large language model in our own head, and you can get stuck in this rut of sort of outputting the same meter and the same beat over and over again without enough variation, so it becomes sing-songy. And so with an intense meter and rhyme as you use, how do you keep from that? Is it in the revision process, or are you conscious of that as you're writing? Like, how does a poem like that come out and to avoid feeling sing-songy, having enough variety and surprise that it doesn't become predictable? Because I think it's such a pull toward that, what's expected of the rhythm and the meter and the rhyme.
Yeah, I mean, with that poem, Tim, I began that conscious that I was writing a bunch of sonnets and trying to do something different. So I'd even the very first drafts of that poem, I was trying to work in anapaests instead of working in iambs. And that a couple of the poems in the collection, I think I wrote in, at least to some degree, in an attempt to change the music that I was working with in other poems, forcing myself to go in different directions. I hope the poem succeeds in not sounding sing-song. You know, there's a couple metrical substitutions in the poem, and you know, it's hopefully enough variation in the length of the sentences and everything else to resist that effect. But it's I think it's a real danger for a poet that's writing in form to fall in love with the rhythm and ignore the other pleasures in the poem that are more obvious to the free verse poet. And I think you said early on, maybe when you were talking with Beneth before, about how you're looking for more formal work in Rattle. I feel the same way, and much of the formal work I get, it has that real thrust of the music is well managed, but there's so little to see in the poem. There's, you know, that's the images are weak, or there's some other thing that's an essential pleasure that's missing. And I think that's something that the formal poet's got to be wary of.
Yeah, I think, some people, the ones who are great formal poets, find a way to use form to drive surprise. But then there's this sort of opposite direction pull toward the expected, because your ears sort of producing the content instead of it. So it's interesting. Do you I talked with Annie Finch for the last issue of Rattle about all the different types of forms. She mentions the 5. That was anapaestic trimeter, which is one of the different forms. Do you feel like that her sort of thesis is that different forms are neglected, and we're sort of in like a prison, even within formal poetry, of iambic meters, and that anapaestic meter, which is short, long, which you heard in that poem there, and there are other meters too, that used to be more written in, and we kind of forgotten them over the years. Is that your sense of it? And do you feel differently writing in anapaestic trimeter like that?
Yeah, I think I do feel a little bit different. That poem, and then the first one that I read, A Few Keys, that's it's a poem in anapaest also, though it's a little harder to spot because, like those sonnets where the pentameter is broken, the trimeter is broken in the Few Keys poem. But there's a handful that are anapaestic in this collection. I certainly wasn't trying to cover like all my bases or something like that. There are poets like Auden, or sometimes I think Alicia Stallings, or it's Austin Allen, who they seem like they're going to do everything. At some point, every form that's out there, they feel compelled to master it and to nail one of those. And that's not really my feeling. I've got my favorite kinds of music, and I think I tend to write either in anapaests or iambs. There's a couple of other things in this collection, or there's a poem in a more roughly 3-beat line that's a longer narrative kind of poem. And then there are some poems that are rhymed but not metered, and it's a couple of things like that. But mostly, I feel like I'm better at managing the iambs and anapaests, and I'm not necessarily interested in tackling other forms just because they're out there and I haven't done them.
Yeah, well, I am looking forward to the episode when Annie comes on the Rattlecast sometime. She's been out of the country, so couldn't do it, but we're gonna I gotta make sure she does a lot of different. Covers those all 5 that she talked about. It's gonna be fun to hear the difference in the music. You mentioned John Poach, and he was the founder of 32 Poems. And I think it's a good segue too, to talk about that. How did you end up as the editor there, and how long have you been doing it? And tell us a little bit about 32 Poems, what the vision is.
Yeah, well, when John and Deborah Ager were the co-editors when the journal started, and I think they originally they at about the same time that One Story started. And I think they kind of imagined it as like the poetry equivalent of One Story. But I'm not entirely sure that they knew of One Story. They both magazines came out like within a year of each other, something like that. But they were imagining something that was short enough and selective enough that someone could actually read the whole thing, rather than so many of the other literary journals that, you know, are 400 pages long, or it's just a really thick journal where the temptation is to look at the names that you know and read those, and then by that point another one's come in the mail. So that it was, 32 pages, everything fit on a single page. It was a side stapled journal to begin with, and I think they were just trying to find. They also felt like that shorter lyrics were being overlooked. And that's not necessarily all of what's motivating the magazine now, but I think that was kind of maybe I'm probably doing an injustice to the complexity of their imagination of the project, but that was some of what was motivating.
Yeah, the minimalism too. I mean, just having something that could be appreciated at that scale. There's this way that there's just publish is like the idea given poetry's entry into academia. Publish or perish. Everybody's got to keep cranking out poems, and they always love to get in the mail 32 poems, which is this little, thin book that you could enjoy every single poem in a short sitting and absorb it all. I think it's just a great format, and maybe one of the reasons why I wanted to do chapbooks too is just the idea of how nice it was to read 32 poems every time it came in the mail.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you feel this way about Rattle, Tim, but I sometimes think that like 32 is too many. Like, it's not quite, it's really too much to sit down and read all in one sitting. And I'm not sure that there are really 32 great poems written in English every year, and we're certainly not publishing all of them. I don't know. 32 seems like a manageable amount, but it's sometimes hard to find 32 that you love for an issue.
Yeah.
Do you feel that?
It's interesting because every issue of Rattle is
with Rattle. Do you feel
it's about, every issue of Rattle has 35 to 40 poems, so it's really not that many more actually, because we have the interview section and the notes section in the back is pretty long. And so when you combine, it's like 20 in the open section and then 15 to 20 in the theme. And to me, I feel like we publish every poem that we want to publish, and there's this way that too, I'm looking for a bigger variety than my imagination, or my desires. So I'm kind of like trying to hit different people. I want something for everybody in there. I don't want anybody to say like none of these poems are for me at all, but I don't want to say these poems are for me either. I want, to be enough variety where you're sort of surprised every time you turn. And so that's kind of the idea of it, of the way I think about it. So we sort of grab everything and trying to just have a big variety within what we're looking for. And so I don't know do you think of it that way, or do you think of a singular kind of aesthetic? Because I was trying to think about that. 32 poems it's something more than just that they're shorter poems. In a more digestible format. There's something about it that I have an affinity toward too, and I think Rattle does as well. And I was thinking maybe it's that they're all sort of about something. I don't know how to put it. They all have a real urgency at what they're trying to explore and figure out, maybe. And there's less of less sort of bells and whistles and more trying to get to the heart of a truth more simply. It might be it. I don't know. What do you think of like the aesthetic, and do you how much do you try to stick within the rails of it?
Well, we've got a tagline, and this is, we're about to head to AWP next week, so I'll wind up giving this spiel like 300 times in the next 7 days. We say that it's poetry for the ear, the eye, and the ego. That we're looking for poems that are conscious of the ways that they sound, that some of the meaning is communicated through the poem's sonic effect, and that even as they're doing that, they're not forgetting the pleasures of sensual experience, that's often incorporated into that's the image work of the poem. And then when we say that they're poems for the ego, I mean, that's kind of just because it sounds good, but also that we're trying to point towards the idea that we want there to be something at stake for the poet in the poem, or the speaker of the poem, that it's not just a language game, but there's something human that's really at stake in the situation and the imagination. So with that as like a center of the aesthetic, I think we're trying to find ways of pushing that as much as we can. Like the most compelling case that the associate editors will make as they're pitching a poem is something like, I love this poem. I think it's right for 32 poems, even though it's not what we do. Like that's kind of the one that we want the most, is something that's going to take that central aesthetic and then kind of stretch it in an interesting way. But I don't think of each issue as something for everybody. I think there are some readers that aren't going to be interested in what we do, and that's fine. But we are trying to spread out that aesthetic and find new ways of surprising ourselves and our readers with something that we enjoy that seems, unlike, a little bit unlike us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think maybe it's similar to what I was trying to say. I mean, there's definitely, certain schools that we just, we're not avant-garde type, and we're never going to be unless there's something really, accessible is a word that comes up too a lot. If I'm not going to understand something and it's not in a way that makes me want to keep reading it over and over again, it's just not something that we've ever been interested in, the almost 30 years we've been doing it. And so that kind of experimental stuff that really is pushing the boundaries of maybe poetry itself isn't as much what we're looking for. And then politics too, trying to not be too political, I think is something that we're angling toward too. And so there is like a range, but then we try to be, scattered within the range or something. So it's interesting to hear that. What is the staff? What's the structure like? Is it affiliated with a college now? I'm really not exactly sure.
No, it's not. The college that I work at gives us the mailbox, because like you, we sometimes get hate mail, and to the point where I didn't want it all coming to our house. I didn't want our home address on the website. A couple of years back, I got a letter with on one side it was like Whitman's face with the eyes blacked out, and then a poem that someone had written about how much they hated me on the back of the image. So at that point, we asked the school to give us a mailbox, but that's about it. And our staff are scattered all over the place, from out there in your neck of the woods in California to North Carolina and DC area to Texas. We're really all over the place. Everything that comes into the magazine, I take a quick look at, but a very quick look, and I'll filter out the things that I can at a glance tell aren't going to be a fit. And that tends to be things like the first line, the word lips is in like red ink, and then sky is in blue ink, and the next line or something like, it's just to try to save time for our staff as I'm checking things in. And then pretty much everything goes out to the associate editors. They'll review it first, and then anything that they like, we'll pass around and talk about and see if it's a fit for us. And if they don't, then that's the end of it. When we're trying to say no within a couple of weeks to as much as we can. If it's been more than a couple of weeks, somebody on the team has really liked it. And we're thinking about.
Well, that's a great way to be. And speed is really important because there's just so much, weight, and so much, the acceptance rates are so low. How long have you been doing it? I'm not quite sure about that. It's at least 10 years, right? Or so?
Yeah, I started working on the journal in, I think, 2009, when I went to Texas Tech, and I was one of the associate editors. At the time, they were only taking submissions via mail. So I would just, be reading the slush pile and trying to make my case for the things that I liked. And about the time that I was finishing up the PhD, John Poach was looking to stop. He wanted to spend more time reading Dante and less time reading the slush pile. So so he invited me to take the journal. And I think a lot of that was that our aesthetics were pretty similar, that we liked a lot of the same things. And he liked the idea that the journal wouldn't transform drastically as a result of picking up a new editor.
Yeah. Well, let's hang on one second, David. It's kind of been getting choppy and it's getting worse. Do you want to like maybe hang up and then get back on the Zoom for a second? Maybe get a better connection.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So just we'll sit tight and wait a second for David to leave and come back, because I think that might fix it. It was good before, but it got a little it was getting a little choppy. Let's see. So in the meantime, let's entertain you. What do you want to do? Do you want to read a random poem? Let's see. We'll see how long David takes to get back. I'll push the random button at Rattle. We'll do Altar Boy and Tennis Shoes. This is Tim Sproul from winter 2006. We'll read that right now. Why not? This is, here we go. Altar Boy and Tennis Shoes. Just because it's Waldorf, Oregon, and not St. Peter's. Just because the church bulletin is a bad Xerox. There we go. Although I see Tuesday in Ellen Blunt's fudge and seafoam sail to repair St. Francis damaged in the windstorm. Just because the crucifix is carved with all the grace of chainsaw art and the girl in the front wears a Nelly It's Getting Hot in Here t-shirt. Just because the congregation's chant of the responsorial psalm traps me in the hull of a Spanish galley rowing toward oblivion, and because the thermostat is stuck on 77, does not mean I can't find some sort of epiphany in the family seated together, the air fragrant with discount shampoo, the crusty priest's prayer for a busload of mission workers killed in Zaire, the feathery pile of ones in the collection plate. As the priest rises, I find an ocean breeze of hope after I've prayed for Dad's post-op tumor to clear, for peace in the Middle East, and for a new girlfriend. I'm admiring the boy with his big brown eyes and swift glide around the altar, down the thick carpeted steps to the aisle, and his bowing at the right time, and his time when instead he could be playing Nintendo. So I can only ask, as he carries the cross and leads us out the double pine doors into the blessed fresh air, as I'm drawn to the white and purple Allen Iverson Reeboks, what the hell was his mother thinking? That was an old poem, a classic Altar Boy and Tennis Shoes from Rattle, just to kill some time. And George David Clark is back. Hey, George, let's see. Is it better now?
Yeah, we'll hope so. There's a lot of people in this house who I asked not to use the internet.
Gotcha. Well, it's definitely
they
much
may or
better
may
now.
not be paying any attention to me.
Well, let's switch and do another poem. Now, I want to talk more about 32 poems, but let's do another poem. And let's do Sun on Your Shoulders, a really short one. And this was one from Rattle.
Yeah, it's thank you, by the way. Sun on Your Shoulders. May the reckless sum of summer freckles, kiss by kiss, become a necklace.
Yeah, so that's a different form too.
Very
and speaking
short
of, trying to get something different and scattershot what we do. That's a poem that comes in. You're like, I've never seen a poem like this before, with each syllable on its own line, a tiny little poem like that. How did that poem come to be?
Oh God, I don't even remember, Tim. I'll tell you what I do remember is that you sent me an email saying that you'd take this poem, and I thought that I had a great idea for rethinking its shape on the page.
Mm-hmm.
You may remember I sent you an email and suggested like maybe it should be with some of this movement it should kind of like be necklace shaped or something on the page, which was a terrible idea. And I'm really grateful you talked me out of that.
Well, that's good. I don't remember that, but it sounds like something I would try to talk you out of too. So that's great. Yeah.
Well, you did the poem a service by doing that. I think I don't remember how it started, but it was I was apparently remembering that I had tried that other shape. Just reminds me that I was still trying to figure out what it should look like on the page, even after I had felt like I was done with the poem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the thing that I should say too, if anybody has any questions for George David Clark, let me know in the chat window. It's kind of the time to do that. I'll be looking on Facebook or YouTube, so just leave any questions. It helps if you do that, all caps question, so I make sure I see that it's a question. But I'm happy to pass anything along. Cynthia Sims says the hate mail is so weird, and it is. And so I wanted to ask you about that because I think I don't know if I've had an editor who's been an editor for longer on the show. I mean, maybe I have, but does it get to you? Like the constant sort of there's a weird way that this whole business that we do trying to make magazines is sort of like we're like merchants in negativity, even though we're trying to be positive the whole time, because there's so much like rejection going out. So many, somebody pours their heart out on the page and then you're telling them, well, this is not for us, better luck somewhere else or whatever, over and over and over again. And we push that like reply button and then you get so much of it back too. I mean, there's just so much hate mail, so much like animosity swirling around everything. Does that ever get to you, or do you, manage to not let it somehow? And if so, help me.
I think it does get to me. The hate mail doesn't. That's not. There's not a lot of that. I remember the Whitman one because it was so great, since it came with an image and a poem that described me in somewhat gory detail. But beyond that, that's such a rare exception. Usually it's just people who are kind of angry to have gotten a rejection letter and they fire something back at you that's just angry that you said no. And that doesn't occupy much space in my mind. But I think what really gets to me is just telling people no all the time, that I send, 20 or 30 rejection letters a day, most days. And it might sometimes be, weeks between accepting something. And I think that can get to me. For a while, I tried to send some positive praise for someone's poem into the world every day. Like if I didn't accept something for 32 poems, that meant that I needed to send someone like a fan letter or something that, just like a couple of sentences at night that, I'd saw your poem such and such a place and admired it, that sort of thing. And I tried to do that for this was a couple years back. And I told myself I would do that every day. I would say something, encouraging about something that I admired every day. And I probably got through February or something like that. And it's just hard to keep up that pace too. But even though I can't do it every day, I'm trying to do that as much as I can to offset the negativity of always having to tell people no so much.
Yeah, it is such a strangely negative, thing that we do, and there's no way around that. But let's.
There's just so little. Mm-hmm. There's so little that I like. I don't like much.
Well, I think that's the case for everybody, though. You look through people flip through 32 poems and say, "Oh, I like 3 of those."
Exactly,
and that's just the
that'd
nature
be great.
Of exactly. Any book you like, there's certain poems that seem great, and there's others that don't. And then you wonder if how much overlap there is between people. Which is the nice thing. I love that we send our email every morning to so many people because then I get all the feedback from each poem, and I can see the responses everybody gives. But it's I don't know. It's just such a strange thing. Poetry is such an intimate, personal thing that there's only so much of it that can really resonate with anybody. So yeah.
So on one hand, when you're doing that most of the time and you're just saying no, I feel like I've got to balance it by reading some things I really love at the same time. Like if I just, because 32 poems is going to eat up a couple of hours of every day. If that's the only poetry that I read is the unsolicited submissions, that's not a healthy way to spend all of my reading time. There are lots of times though where you get way more positive response. Right when an issue comes out, from the subscribers, we'll get lots of positive things then. And something like attending AWP, that is always just such a shot in the arm for a little magazine like ours. That sure, so some people will come by and they open the conversation with, "You rejected my poems," or so. You'll get that kind of thing too. But 9 times out of 10, it's somebody who comes by and says that they really admire the magazine, or it's a contributor that I've traded emails with and we've worked on a poem together, but we've never met in person. And the positivity so outweighs the negativity in those moments that really keeps us going too.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that. That's the nice thing about the AWP. Even though I never feel like I fit in, you do have those experiences, interactions, which are really nice. People just walking by. Dick Westheimer asked a question, which I'm kind of curious about too. How active are you in submitting poems to other journals? Has having your work rejected affected how you correspond with those who send poems to you? And that's the thing that I have struggled with the whole time being an editor myself, is that I don't know, I don't want to send poems anywhere because I feel really awkward about it, you know? Like, I'd love to send poems to 32 poems, but then it's like, you know, you were just on the Rattlecast and, you know, I published you. So is there like this, like, well, since you published me, should you publish me? And then it just feels all awkward and weird and I just don't do it. So that's the reason I just post my poems on social media and like forget about it. Do you have any issues with that or?
Oh, I totally get that, Tim. I feel like it's so much easier to send poems to someone I don't know than somebody I do know. If I know the editor, it takes a lot for me to send poems there. Even more if you're friends, you know, I don't really do that. Yeah, so a lot easier to send things to a stranger than to someone that you know and you admire their work and you know that they're going to feel uncomfortable telling you no. I mean, that's one of the reasons that 32 poems, we don't solicit anything, you know, as a rule. I mean, there have been times where we're getting down to the deadline and we're 5 poems short. And I'll send emails to a couple people who are strangers, but whose work I've admired. But I don't solicit anyone else because I don't want to have to tell them no. And I also don't want to publish stuff that I don't feel excited about. So yeah, if they send through submittable, that's fine. And I'll try just to send, you know, if we're going to say no, I might send a note that says, you know, thanks for trying us again. If we published them in the past and, you know, I'm still your fan, that sort of tone to it. But that's a lot harder if you're soliciting things.
Yeah, maybe that's, you know, another thing that makes our aesthetics kind of similar because we don't solicit either. The only poems we do in every issue, if there's an interviewee that we interviewed for the issue, we ask them for a poem because it's like, you know, you took the time for an hour to interview you, whatever, we thought you were good enough that you were worth talking to. So whatever you send me, I'm just going to put in. But otherwise, I hate the idea of just exactly what you said of, you know, declining somebody, you know, after I asked for something seems terrible. And then also taking something I don't actually like is terrible too. So I just, every time I like think about maybe we should start doing that a little bit, it just another thing that like grosses me out. So, and the thing is, I think most journals, it's like half or more, you know, solicited. Like I remember looking at there's an Ask Me Anything with a Paris review on Reddit. And one of the questions was, do you accept unsolicited submissions? And they were like, yeah, we had a poem 3 issues ago that was unsolicited and didn't even come from an agent, you know? And you're like, wait a minute, does that mean every other thing in the entire magazine besides for that is solicited? And the answer is yes. And yet they have people, you know, they have open submissions, you know, people sending them thinking that there's some kind of chance when everything is just coming in from some agent or from, you know, asking somebody who's, you know, the big thing or whatever, won an award. And that's how other magazines kind of function. So I think it's maybe unique to not solicit and to be something we do.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'm always afraid of is that they're going to send me work that they don't totally believe in either. And I felt tempted to do that too. When people have solicited me, that to send the things that haven't found a home somewhere else that I still think are pretty good, but they've struck out an awful lot, and maybe I'm not even sending them around anymore. And I don't want to then spend an hour politely declining work that the poet wasn't already going to send my way. I don't know. It's tricky, but I think things are made easier for me by not soliciting work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, same here. And then one more thing, as an editor, like what do you look for? Do you have any advice to submitters? Like if they're sending in poems, is there something that like catches your eye? I was listening to a Billy Collins show a while ago, and he said his advice was to put your best foot forward, like put the best poem in the beginning of the manuscript. You know, do you have anything else that catches your eye and makes you stand up? Because for me, well, you tell me, and then I'll tell you how it feels for me.
I think that's pretty good advice to put the best poem first. I think the first thing that catches my attention is rhythm, and I don't mean meter, but just a line that sounds like a line. where it's the poet's thought of the way the line is going to happen rhythmically across the page. And I mean, so much of what we get just that doesn't seem to be part of what the poet's thinking about. And it really stands out when someone is hearing the rhythm of the line, whether it's, I mean, it happens in free verse as much or more than it happens in metered verse. But somebody who's really hearing that sound, I'm thinking of like Plath, love sets you going like a fat gold, is it flat gold watch or flat gold clock?
I'm not sure.
This is in Morning Song, I think. Yeah. Love sets you going like a fat gold watch. It's free verse, but it just sounds so good rhythmically. And that's the opening line of that poem. That's the first thing that jumps out at me. When I immediately get excited about a submission when you come across a few lines like that.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. To me, I always compare it to like an old-fashioned radio dial. You know, you're just like turning it and you hear like static, static, static. Then you hear voices, but oh, that's like people talking. And you static, static, static. Oh, more people talking. And then, oh, there's a song. And then you put the song, oh, that's a channel. And then you put that in a pile. I don't even care about the content until later. It's like, this was actually music. And then we'll consider which songs we want to pick later. But the first step is there whatever that magical thing is, which is a rhythm. And it's poetry is the music of speech, and music is about repeated patterns. And so there's something to repetition and pattern. I really don't know what it is, but there's a way you can just hear it, and you hear it within like one sentence, and that's all it takes. It's always amazing to me.
I love that metaphor of turning the dial and looking for the music. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
And then after that fact, so you have so you do that. You've heard sort of a voice in poems. Then you have poems to consider. What other factors do you come into play at that point?
I think I'm thinking about the rest of the things that we've already taken for the issue and trying to find. I mentioned earlier, sometimes I'll find myself, I've got 6 faith-driven poems or something in this issue. I need to look in other directions. Or, we've already got 2 poems with horses in it this issue. We can't take another horse poem, or, it's some sense of balancing the content of the work and looking for different kinds of music. That I don't want a station that just plays like one artist. And it's even if it's different poets, sometimes it can seem like a single artist. Mm-hmm. And I even within our aesthetic, I want more distribution.
Yeah. Well, yeah, really well said. And I think it's just interesting, anybody you talk to who's been through that, of picking poems and putting things together, it's a very similar way, because there's like only one way to go about it, really. And you have to hear the music in a poem. Do you have any advice to people for developing that? Like if you're struggling and you don't sort of have a voice, what is a voice and how would you go about finding it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what happens when you read well. If you're reading widely enough, my undergraduate students, especially the ones who are just starting out, they'll sometimes say things about how they don't want to sound like anyone else. And I think that's not the wise way to begin the process of developing your voice, but rather like to try to sound like someone else who you really admire. And then to find someone else who you really admire and try to sound like them a little bit. And a third person that you really admire. And like your voice isn't like something that's spontaneously generated out of you without any influences whatsoever from anyone else. But it's like a rich commingling of a lot of different valuable influences. And that's probably something that only comes from reading widely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I definitely agree with that too. 2 lightning round quick questions, and then we'll read the last poem. They're both from Mary Torregrosa. She says, and they can be yes or no questions maybe. Do you reject poems that are good but can't be included in that particular journal at that time, or that the team disagrees with but you like? And then there's another one too. But what about that?
Yeah, I think we've definitely passed on poems that are good but aren't right for this issue and maybe wouldn't be right for the next. I mean, I don't mind holding them for a little while, but I wouldn't want to take something that I didn't know when we were going to find a chance to get it into the magazine. Um, so there are things that I've admired that don't seem right for 32 poems. There are definitely things that I like that other people on the team don't like, and I get talked out of. Um,
Yeah, I mean
there,
that's how
there
it is for Rattle too. There's sort of this, me and Alan, we'll sit around and I'll try to pitch him to him poems, the founding editor, Alan Fox, and I'll argue for it, and how strongly I argue is maybe based on my opinion of it. And sometimes he's like, "Oh, I love it," and sometimes he cries, and sometimes he doesn't, and then we just like argue until we come to a resolution. And that's kind of how it goes with Rattle. So that's interesting.
When one of the associate editors like sends me an email that's like, "This is the best poem I've read all year," it's even if I'm not crazy about it, that's probably a poem that's going to go in. So it's when they're really passionate about a thing, I want to be easy to persuade by those poems.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also good poems that I say no to, and then I realize I just made a mistake. One that comes to mind, there is a poem by Rebecca Hazelton, a poet who we've published now. I don't know that we had at the time, but I really admire her work an awful lot. And she sent me this poem called "Trying Four-Leggedness," and it was like in my maybe pile, and I there was something special about it, and I read it like 24 times, once a night for several weeks. And I finally just decided I don't get it. I'm missing something in the poem. It's not for us. And sent her just like a kind note saying, "I'd love for you to try us again." And then like a couple months went by and I saw it in another magazine, and it instantly clicked, and I got it, and it made sense to me in a way that I don't think she changed a word, but it was just that I failed the poem. I wasn't the editor that the poem deserved for me to be, and I just completely blew one. And would have loved to have had that poem in my magazine, but I didn't.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point too. Just some days, sometimes you're at a movie theater and you think the movie stinks, and then it turns out it was just that you were in a bad mood that day, and you watched it again 10 years later, and it's like, why did I hate that movie? It's actually pretty good.
Well, mine's even worse because it wasn't one day. It was over the course of many days. I had so many chances to get it right, and I still made the wrong choice. Yeah. So it's. Yeah.
One more quick one from Mary. She asks, do you recognize the style of well-known poets who've submitted anonymously? Interesting question.
Honestly, I don't get many anonymous submissions from well-known poets.
Yeah, I think they'd use their clout mostly.
Yeah.
The thing that happens to me is that, in the Rattle Poetry Prize, we'll have, because it's completely, very carefully anonymized. And so I'll think I know who the poet is, and then I'm wrong, like, 95% of the time. And so I can't even guess like the gender of the poet. You think that there's like some difference, and I'm just like, I thought that was, some, and then it's like somebody totally different. And certain poets do use certain fonts. You kind of like, I think I know who that is because they like that font. If you see submissions a lot, but you can't. It's really it's an interesting world when you're looking at it that way.
Yeah, the well-known people aren't submitting to us anonymously anyways, though we have published poems that were submitted anonymously, that they're usually coming from people who are using that anonymity for some other reason. I'm happy to fall in love with one where I don't know the poet's name, but the people who have a name I'm going to recognize usually tell me who they are.
Yeah, because why not? Yeah, it's true. Well, let's wrap up. It's been fun to talk to another editor, but let's wrap up with go back to your book again and the last poem you wanted to share.
Right. This is Yes Tomorrow. Maybe one thing I'll say about this is that I wanted to, there's the epigraph to the book comes from Ecclesiastes 3, that I know the burden God has laid on human beings. He's made everything beautiful in its time, right? And like that burden, I think, is really kind of central to the poem. The burden of time and mortality, but also the beauty that is attendant to it. And hopefully the book isn't just a book of elegies, but there are love poems like the one that was published in Rattle that I read a minute ago. And then this one comes from a little malapropism of my oldest child, who time's such a difficult thing for them to figure out how it works. And he would use this word yestermorrow to talk about yesterday, but also tomorrow, or like any time that wasn't right now. Will we do it, or did we do it yestermorrow? Or it was some time that wasn't now. And I found myself imagining a time outside of time where there would be none of like time's obligations bearing down on many of us. Yestermorrow. Hallelujah, it's nobody's birthday, nobody's wedding, and nobody's wake. For once the glib calendar's dumb. These brave hours have sloughed off their date. No unions are striking, no voters are polled, though if anything, dawn has come early. While the coffee is yet to be ground, our displeasures dissolved prematurely. We're a people with bleachers to get to, outlets to enter, entrees to eat. But this morning it's clear to anyone, nothing's planned and there's nowhere to be. If the wind at the backs of our minds is persuasive, still each destination feels wrong. We wander outside boxers to stand at the edge of our lawns. Hallelujah, that here on mortality's turf, the daily's been soundly defeated. The diaries are shredded inside us. The dockets have balked and retreated. Any vows we have made to each other melt away in our mouths like confections, and at once they're replaced by the knowledge that at last we're immune to deception. The day picks up its skirts with its eyes closed, eventful, though nothing will count. I hear fireworks rebound one street over. The DeWitts in their front yard make out as local balloonists are coasting their baskets to rest in the neighborhood park. Our children eject from the tire swings and gently tear heaven apart. Even when dusk sizzles through the azaleas, the day feels unwilling to end. Stars flicker back out in the cypress. The moon seems inclined to descend. Hallelujah. The networks have canceled the news with no scandals, invasions, or earthquakes. What's next we'll discover in time, when eternity turns into Thursday.
Oh, that's great. I love that yestermorrow word and the story behind it too. We got to coin that and just start using it all over the place because it makes a lot of sense. It was George David Clark. That's the one of the poems from his book, Newly Not Eternal, just out from LSU Press. David, thanks so much for being a guest. It's been really fun talking to you, and it's just a wonderful book. I love the way you use music in your poems.
Well, thanks so much, Tim.
Yep, take care. That was George David Clark. Once again, you can find all of his poetry at georgedavidclark.com. That's just how it's spelled, just how it sounds, George David Clark, all one word, .com. You can find this book and his first book too, Reveille. And let's see. So now we're going to go to our open lines, our prompt lines. And we're going to have our prompt poem of the month too. So let's see if Lynne Knight will arrive in the Zoom, and we'll be having fun with that. But so how this works, if you'd like to share a prompt poem right now, all you got to do is go to promptlines@rattle.com. Email your poem to promptlines@rattle.com. That way we can show the poem on the screen as the poems were appearing during the show now. And then find the Zoom link, which is right here. I'm going to paste it into the chat windows on Facebook and YouTube. So here comes the Zoom link, and we'll pin it at the top. And here comes it on Facebook as well. And so the prompt for this week, as you see, was to write a poem entitled A Brief History of Something, A Brief History of Blank, where that is a word that needs to be translated, and the poem is less than a page. And that's a sort of a homage type prompt to last week's guest, Remus Uzgaris, and his poem, A Brief History of Vilnius. So, and that wasn't translated Vilnius, but he translates a lot, so we kind of combined the two into a cool prompt. And that is going to be your prompt for this week. I'll be right back with that and more poetry in just a second. So sit tight and I'll be right back. And we're back, and we have our prompt poems editor here, none other than Katie Dozier, live from the Woodlands, Texas. Hey, Katie, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I love the discussion tonight. I learned a lot as somebody who's learning to learning to try to edit poems and had a hard time having to send out a lot of rejections on Saturday. It was a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, we don't want to, get you too cynical with all the negativity poems there. I don't want to ruin that happiness that you infect the second half of the program with. So maybe you should. I don't know. Maybe you should make me send the letters or something.
There's plenty of sunshine in this old bag. Don't worry.
All right. So this is time for the prompt poem of the month, which we're going to publish tomorrow. And tell us about how the prompt poem reading went this month and what you chose.
Oh my gosh, they were so good this month. Like, it was just crazy. I looked at this and it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be spending the whole day sending personalized rejections because so many people deserve one. I sent a lot and I was really blown away. The poems seriously are getting better and better. I don't know what I'm going to do next month.
Yeah, well, we always do have, extra poems too that we, consider for publication in the regular print issue too. So there's always I think we've gotten 4 maybe print poems too out of the prompt poems. So that's really great. In addition to the, I think 5 winners we've had so far doing this prompt of the month series. Mm-hmm. So what was it? Was there one prompt that stood out this month as the one that people wrote about most, or were they sort of balanced?
It was more balanced than I was expecting it to be, actually. I mean, of course, we're trying to balance the prompts too and have some form in them, and then also some things that inspire maybe people to take it in a little bit of a weirder direction. So I would say it was pretty balanced what everybody wrote, because there are a lot of people that write for everyone, and that's really exciting for me to get to read. And also sometimes I can pull out and say hey, I think that this was your strongest poem of the month. And it's really fun to get to read so many different people's poems and really get to know them as poets through it too, because, we're not doing it blind for this one category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing too. That's important to note. People worry about if they read the poem on the show. This is the one category of Rattle where it's not anonymized at all, because we want to encourage everybody to read them on the show, and so given that, we can't really anonymize anything if we've seen the poems before. But, and I don't think you're as forgetful as me. So if I've seen them before, I probably have no recollection. I didn't even remember my own poems. But
my poker training came into play because I used to have to play poker with my friends. It's kind of the same thing. I mean,
that's true. That's a good point. But so we have Lynne Knight as our prompt poet of the month, and Lynne's here. But do you want to explain, what you liked about this poem, why you chose it, and then we'll have Lynne on to share it too.
I love this poem from the onset. I do my reading in a way where I do the first reading and it's not a detailed read. It's like a get you to the next round kind of read. And this poem immediately captured all of my attention and I just loved it. It made me laugh out loud. And then it made me think more deeply about things too, which is what I love the most perhaps in poems. So I'm really excited that she's here to read it and share it with us right now.
Yeah, it's really exciting to have Lynne Knight, who was on the Rattlecast way back in the first year, and also a Rattle Poetry Prize winner in the past. Hey, Lynne, how you doing? It's great to see you again.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Tim, as always, and thank you for that great conversation. That was fascinating, the two editors, and then the poems are so beautiful. They're really wonderful poems.
Oh, well, thank you.
So-
Well, it's great to see you again. It's been a while, and can you tell us, how this poem came to be? Why did you pick this prompt, and how did you jump into it?
I think the only thing that happened was that I loved the Diana Getz poem that inspired it, and I wanted to write about a silent encounter. And so I sort of went back through my long memory about silent encounters. And this is not an actual recount of one, but it's close enough. So that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you go ahead and read now so we can all...
It's a nice segue from the earlier conversation because I am old enough now, and that's what this poem is really about, to feel the burden of time and mortality. So here we go. And I have discovered that one of the best ways of dealing with that is humor. So body talk. Sometimes in airports, I leave my body behind, my old body, I mean. I step into the younger version, the one where I flirt with just about anybody. Who cares? Because nobody knows me. It has to be a big airport, preferably international. And I carry on as if I'm not even 30 yet. So whoever stares back at me can trust me and start imagining how hot it will be to ditch the flight and head for an airport hotel. This happened the other day. He was maybe late 40s, no gut, but nothing too fit. Just a nice looking guy who wouldn't make a quick fuck complicated or need to ask my name afterward just to be polite. So I smiled. He smiled back. Maybe not at me. The gate was jammed with people still trying to rebook after storms the day before. Still, the 20-something me went right on trying to woo. I decided to pull my carry-on closer, wanting to be sure he meant his smile for me. I moved closer, and he stood, offering the old lady his seat.
Yeah, it's a great punchline type ending, and a great poem too on a number of levels. Humor dealing with serious issues at the same time. Thanks so much for sharing that and participating in it. It's really fun to have you here, Lynne. Katie, do you want to
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, do you want to add anything to that poem, Katie?
I just want to say that your note, Lynne, it was great how you just said you were just having some fun, like maybe you didn't expect it to be an amazing poem. And I love that kind of expectation because I just thought it was a spectacular poem. And I love, unlocking a deeper subject through humor. I just think it was masterfully done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for writing it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lynne. And it is great to see you. And everybody should go back to that Rattlecast early on. I told Katie earlier, she was like, Tim, when you know that a poet's coming up, you should look at the actual number of the episode. And I didn't do that this time. I'm going to guess,
it's
though, 27.
16.
16. 11 off. Okay, well, episode number 16 with Lynne Knight, and just outstanding. One of my favorite poets always. She's got so many great books. And great to see you, and thanks for being here, Lynne.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Yep.
And thank you for everything you do. It's just wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks. Yep. Take care. Yes, that was Lynne Knight with tomorrow's poem, Body Talk, the prompt poem of the month. And now, Katie, we have a prompt poem for this week. What was the prompt for this week once again? It was, let's see. It was...
Right. Oh, gosh. I'm going to have to say, this is a bad one to have to say off the top of my head.
I got it right here.
Okay.
It is to write a poem entitled A Brief History of X, where X is a word that needs to be translated, and the poem is less than a page. So that was the prompt for this week. What did you come up with?
Well, I have to say it's funny because, I write short poems, as everybody pretty much knows. And so the one that has a brief history of is the one where I end up wanting to write a longer poem, right, guys? That makes a lot of sense. But it is a page. It's just a condensed, it fits on the page. So I passed. It does.
I think you've you pulled a honeycut there. You've honeycut.
I was gonna say I did. I took inspiration. No.
Okay, well, let's hear it. And you got to tell us what the word means too, because I had to look it up.
Okay. Well, I think they'll know.
Okay.
I don't think they will, but okay. Maybe not for my horrible pronunciation of anything approaching French. Okay. A brief history of Le Petit Déjeuner. Do you remember Complete Breakfast? How the camera would glaze over them, frost them with the lens, as if the sliced strawberries were a movie star's thighs. Yes, this may just be flaked sugared corn, they seem to say, but you could make this breakfast beautiful. There is nothing worth noting on my own unphotogenic breakfast. Toaster strudels, grabbed hot, came with a packet of icing I'd squirt on while shielding my breakfast completely from the bus driver. There is no want like the things we don't have time for, the breakfast we can't fork back. These days, my meal's composed of crust and 2 melty cheese, the dark side of bananas. But there was that one in Paris, on my honeymoon, after a red-eye, the sky still clinging to the dark near the old Bastille prison in Montmartre, the yogurt thick as ice cream, raspberries still with a couple of leaves on them. Almost glowing in their red, unblemished youth, no hands having yet tried to squish them. And I know he was there too, speaking perfect French while I undoubtedly volunteered an accidental hola. I can't quite picture him, but I sense a looming carafe of concentrated orange juice almost teetering on the corner, balancing one of my many checkerboard breakfasts to come. Everyone has known an orange one that you sip again and again for years, trying to pretend its fresh squeeze could really taste like the sun if only you could train your taste buds to taste just as you're told to. But really you drink just because someone went to the trouble of stirring it, setting it down, vaguely chilled, on the table. Probably you did. But walk away anyway. Believe me when I say you already paid for it.
Yeah, it's a great poem and great metaphor at the end, Katie. And I have to ask, though, now that you've read it on the prompt lines, are you going to line break it so it's a page and a half instead of 1 page?
I feel like the lines are too long.
It might be.
I feel like it's also funny because, like, I don't know why I realized that I think I accidentally matched my sweater to my poem. So I apologize for
Well, that's
that.
perfect. That's like product placement. That's great.
I was like, why do I want to wear orange? It's February. Anyway.
Well, excellent move, and then calling yourself out for it. That's perfect. But a great poem. I really love I love that. So thanks for sharing it. And I know you got the girls solo right now. So if you got to leave, don't worry about it.
I got to hear your poem before I leave. Well, okay. You're not getting out of it that
well, if
easy.
you got to sneak out, though, we won't hold it against you, is all I'm saying.
I will have to leave, though, after that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so here's my poem. And, for years, I've been writing mostly personal lyrics. It's kind of what I do with different forms and stuff. I'm trying to figure out a way to get out of myself. And I don't know if it's going to work, but we'll see. But this is, I decided I had to do the first foreign, I looked up a thing that was like interesting foreign words. And I told myself I have to do the first one no matter what it is. And I decided to do a prose poem based on that. And so the first word was, I can't say this. Let me try. It's German, and I'm like a lot German, so maybe I should be able to say it. But the word is, this is a brief history of Backpfeifen Geschick. Something like that. Backpfeifen Geschick. But that is translated directly as a face in need of a fist. So somebody we used to call it in like college a punchable face. Like that kid's got a punchable face. But here we go with a brief history of Backpfeifen Geschick. He was born with a face in need of a fist, and he knew it. It wasn't the softness of his cheeks, though they were soft, stuffed full with buckwheat and memory foam. It wasn't that he had a glass jaw or made an easy target. He knew he could take a punch, knew it from the moment he shot through the sheetrock wall of the world, screaming, hole he made a little cave in the cracks of the gypsum. It was something deeper than the flesh of fist could see itself sink into, deeper than the bones beneath the flesh, heavier than the weight of their insistence, the persistence of their shape, even shattered. He moved through life looking for the fist that his face had been missing. He must have, seeing how often it found him. So that is a brief history of Backpfeifen.
I very much enjoy that. I think that's a harder word to translate than Le Petit Déjeuner. Also, I would have struggled with getting into it on that one.
All right. Well, thanks, Katie. Always, a pleasure as always, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks. And then I'll also see you on Thursday for the poetry space.
That's true, for the poetry space. And we are talking about...
We were talking about love poems. And so last year we covered love poems and we kind of moved around and danced around the idea that everything is a love poem almost. So we're going to focus on romantic love poems, which I didn't tell you until right now, but surprise, we're focusing on romantic
I'll dig
love
up some
poems.
romantic love poems samples. We'll talk about that. Whether or not, it's interesting too. So many people we interview say that they started writing poetry to, win people over, to find affection, especially the men, it's a kind of a thing that they do. So we'll see if
Nobody
it's
did that for me.
effective.
I would have taken that. Where was that in high school?
I don't know, but we'll see if we can find any effective love poems. We'll measure it based on that. But anyway.
All right, well, I will be listening with my daughters.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure you will.
okay.
Yeah, and thanks so much, Katie, and we'll
All
see you
right,
later.
thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye. It was Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor, and with our 2 prompt poems this week. And now let's, so we have 22 people on the line right now, which is it's more than normal. I think because it was the prompt poem of the month week, we have more than we usually do. So be mindful of that if we would, no try to sneak in long poems or extra poems, and we'll try to be quick and get through. I'm going to get through everybody no matter how long it takes, but just be cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of people here. But let's start with Dick Westheimer, who jumped right on, as he tends to do. He's got the quick fingers. Hey, Dick, how you doing?
I'm good. I haven't laughed that hard with the fist in the face word in quite a while. Maybe I should get out more, but that was hilarious.
Well, thanks.
I misinterpreted. I should say I misread the prompt a little bit. I rather than have a word from a foreign language, I had a word from a foreign idea.
Well, translated from science into regular speech. There's that
Yeah,
too, I think. And as always, we say a couple of notes. Always, wherever the poems go, we're happy that a poem was generated out of the prompt. And then also, if you want to read like older prompt poems that you finished but you didn't finish within a week, feel free to share older ones too. So I should always say, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I love the challenge of coming up with one each week. And I just came up with a word that sounded good in the title and then went from there. I had all these other ideas of idea words in Hebrew, and I thought, no, I just need to do something that sounds good.
Yeah.
So it's a brief history of bosons or bosons.
Yeah, that does sound good.
And the epigraph is from the CERN site. Stars, planets, and life could only emerge because particles gained mass from a fundamental field associated with Higgs boson, the famed particle that lives for a mere less than a trillionth of a billionth of a second.
Yeah, that's an amazing fact. It is.
So it fits with a brief history. You couldn't have a long history of bosons.
Yeah, that's great.
A brief history of bosons. A brief history of bosons is redundant, is a reminder that what holds everything together, like a caress, is short-lived, that the weakest force is fundamental to what makes every star shine. Glance over the bare shoulder of the girl you've yearned for carries more weight than any crush. Every boson is new and gone before you realize that the nearer you get, the more powerful the pull. So lean close for the kiss that even gravity can't resist. And when the force is too much, give in. For that is how everything in the universe is made, even love.
Great metaphor and great music in that poem too, Dick. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
That was Dick Westheimer with a brief history of bosons. And I should say too, for those who are new, once you read, you can jump off and go back to the YouTube if you want. Then you can see the poems too while you're listening. So feel free to do that. It's still streaming over there on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter too. And also, if you're new, make sure you turn off the stream though while you're on the Zoom, so there's no echo because there's a delay and it gets confusing. So I should try to remember to say that usually. Let's go next to a first-time caller, Zoomer here, Judy Clarence.
Oh, me. Hi.
Yeah,
lovely.
you. Hi, Judy. Yeah, great to see you.
Hi. I'm actually reading from the previous prompt, not this one. That's the one about, is that?
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Because
Anything you have.
Katie asked me to this is the one about the stranger, a silent interaction with the stranger.
Yeah. Feel free to read any from any time,
That's from
because sometimes it's
well,
hard to
Katie,
finish one within a week or whatever, and sometimes you can't make it for a week. Yeah, so that's great.
well, Katie invited me to be here tonight and to read this poem, so I'm just responding to what I'm told to do.
Okay, great.
And it's interesting. This is also has some French in it, and my French is not good, but I'll do my best. It's called Shattuck Avenue, and I hope that people are familiar with Chez Panisse, the very fancy French restaurant in Berkeley, California, that was closed for a while. It is now reopened. Shattuck Avenue. On the steps outside the gate of Chez Panisse, he sits, spare changing. Shell bean gratin, chantelles, carrot ginger soup, plum galette, not to mention Benoît Lehay Rosé, Cornas Granit 2010 vintage, once graced the tables here, bare now for years. He fumbles with his tired mask. He's hungry and worn out. If only I could burst open those locked doors and shower him with creme brulee, with Bourgogne Rouge, with chewy ginger cookies, could toss him toasted almonds, spit roasted chicken with pain d'épices. I smile and keep walking. Somewhere I see Alice Waters placing garlic mustard, spice berries, sweet pizzetta, squash blossoms, snow king peaches, and strewing them like garlands at his shoeless feet.
Oh, yeah, beautiful poem. Thanks so much for sharing that. That was Shattuck Avenue, and I love the details and all the special cooking words. It's interesting too with the these.
Thank you.
It's rare in Rattle It All that I hear poems that I hadn't read as submissions. It's only with the prompt poems and the Ekphrastic Challenge that I don't read everything. So so interesting to see that for the first time. Thanks for sharing that, Judy.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that was Judy Clarence from Penn Valley, California, sharing that Shattuck Avenue. And let's go next to Carla Schwartz.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Carla, how you doing?
I am doing well, and I also felt that the prompt for me, I felt that if Vilnius is something that needs translation, which I didn't think it did, that you don't necessarily have to use a word or that needs translation. What does a word that needs translation even mean? Petit déjeuner is something that everybody knows if they speak French. And so anyway, just one of those things. So
right. Interesting too, Vilnius, it was one thing I looked up or happened to read preparing for last week's episode, but there is no translation. Nobody knows where it comes from. Like there's some hints. Yeah, the actual city. There's some there's one theory that it's like this creek, but then they're like, there's no way a whole city is named after this little creek. That makes no sense. And so there's a whole bunch of confusion about it, I guess. So that was an interesting fact too.
Wow. So my poem is called A Brief History of Schwartz.
Oh, that's great.
Which is a word in German, and that means black. And you'll sort of see that hidden in the poem.
Okay.
Today, I am Schwartz, as I was born Schwartz, of the Bessarabian Schwartzes. What, you ask, is Schwartz? It's the dark curls, the olive skin, no hiding with a name like Schwartz. We are at the end of the line, though. An only son of an only son, dead, his two daughters childless. Such a dark story, this one. A Schwartz might hide in blackness, but not in plain sight. How would you go about translation, Schwartz? Isn't that the job of a poet?
Great last line there. I love the sounds too. Thanks for sharing that. A Brief History of Schwartz. Very good poem. Thanks for sharing it, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's go to Nivedita next so she can get back to work. She's currently on a break. Hey, Nivi, how you doing?
Hey, Tim. I'm doing good, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you.
I think I sent the email to you.
Yeah, let me pull it up. And for some reason, the video's not popping up. Did I? Oh, there we go. I messed up. I pinned Carla by accident. Sorry, Carla. Hope it didn't hurt. So here's Nivi. And let me pull up this poem here. I have it right here. It's a short one, A Brief History of I Can't Say That Word. So not because it's a bad word, just because I have no ability to say words.
It just means being bewitched in French.
Okay. So why'd you pick this word?
It's transversal. Foreign words always seem to get to us, but I think this is a good way to learn some new words for all of us.
Yeah, very true.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Katie, for the prompt. So, a brief history of être transversal. In the quiet embrace of twilight, whispers linger like the scent of old books long forgotten on library shelves. The words on the page dance, bewitching the senses with their elusive grace. Each new sentence holds a secret. Each sigh of the turning page, a spell woven into the fabric of the being, enchants me under a papyrus cloak. Pages whisper secrets, binding spells within their folds for me to fall under. Between words, worlds arise within the book's silent charm as the magic inks unfold. Fingers trace those words in worlds of their own, on Sorcella.
Oh, that's a wonderful. I love that. Fingers trace the words in worlds of their own. Yeah, that's beautiful. And a great word, too. Thanks for sharing that, Nivi.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks. Very great show.
Yep, take care. And that was Nivi DeKarthik with the brief history of I'm Not Going to Try. And let's see. Next up, we will go to Douglas Silver.
Hey, Tim, Katie, all the poets.
Hey, Douglas. Yeah, great to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks. I just want to give a quick thank you to Audrey Friedman. I know she's not here, but a while back she mentioned Drifting Sands, the Journal of Haibun and Tanka Prose. They just accepted a poem from me, and it'll be in the next issue, so I wanted to thank her for that.
Oh, congratulations.
There's been a lot of great Haibun here at Rattle. So Katie, Tim, I heard you talk earlier about submitting poems and all that, but I invite you to submit them to Drifting Sands, to any of the poets, because there's been some great Haibun here shared at Rattlecast. So I'll put their address in the chat at the end.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. I wrote a poem called A Brief History of Ayer, which I just emailed in today.
Yep, I have it right here.
Thank you. I know it's not me. I mean, not just me. But why does everything seem less funny than it used to? In Spanish, especially Mexican Spanish, since there are many, mañana means morning and tomorrow, literally. But figuratively, it means not now, but sometime in the future, maybe. I think ayer in all Spanishes means yesterday, literally. And I think ayer could also mean not now, but sometime in the past, maybe. Everything seems more funny ayer. I mean, Jamie D. imitating his father, saying, "Fick it, Susan," with an I, and I'd laugh and laugh the more he said it. And Douglas O., after his night as a dishwasher in a high-end restaurant, imitating the owner's chef. "Hurry up, you lazy SOB," and I'd laugh and laugh the more he said it. And Richard Pryor using the F word and the N word in every letter of the alphabet word more and better than anyone ever. And I'd laugh and laugh the more he said it. I know it's not me, I mean, not just me, but I haven't laughed that hard in a long time. Not since ayer. Thanks very much.
Yeah, that's great. Another great ending and a great word, too. Reminds me of the yestermorrow.
Yes, I wrote that down from your talk with George, yeah.
Yeah, that is a word, not now, is a great sort of category that we don't really use in English. It's really nice. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. A different concept of time as well, which I like. Not always looking at our watches and things and our phones, there's different ways to share time.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
How useful that would be. When are you going to do that? Not now. We should bring that out. Thanks for sharing that, Douglas.
Thank you.
That was Douglas Silver with A Brief History of Ayer. And next, let's go to Mike Bales.
Good evening.
Yeah, hey, Mike.
I accidentally translated a foreign person.
Well, there you go.
Um,
As long as it came up as something, we're happy.
the the name always rings to me. It's a brief history.
Oops, hang on, Mike. Sorry. I muted you by accident.
Oh, I'm back.
Sorry, there you go.
A brief history of Jacques Marquette. Marquette always sticks with me because I'm in the Midwest. Because when my parents and I moved, settled into Davenport, the first street we lived on was Marquette Street. So, and he's tied to the Mississippi River and a lot of things. So he's someone who stuck with me. So I wrote this poem, and it's called A Brief History of Jacques Marquette.
Okay, yeah, let's hear it.
It was a trading route he wanted when Jacques Marquette established a mission, and later he found a northern stream portrayed by native tribes after he learned their language. As blue waters glistened in sunlight, they said, "This is your destiny, your dream." He followed waters through forests, exploring wilds of the territory, but he could never imagine they would become part of a great nation. He stopped 400 miles away from the Gulf when he came upon traders near a tributary who held trinkets in their pockets. The steps he took through territorial land led to Chicago and Green Bay, and Portage, Wisconsin grew in his wake. His journey started at the St. Lawrence River and went through the upper reaches, with his bones buried in the gloved hand, the lower peninsula of Michigan. Today, winds from the north sing a tribute to his life, a deep love felt as they drive the Midwest.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I never knew Jacques Marquette. So interesting to hear that, Mike, and get the story behind that. I see the word like Marquette College and things like that. So it's cool to see.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, thanks. So Mike Bales with a brief history of Jacques Marquette. And next, let's go to another first-time caller. We have Margaret Plaganis here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, folks, for such inspiring and tickling poems today.
Oh, well, thanks so much for joining us. And so, what did you have for us to share?
I jumped on the chance to an acrostic challenge to focus on a photograph.
Mm-hmm.
And Katie sent me a response that says, couldn't get you in, but won't you consider reading it when we get together Monday night? So
great. Well, I'm glad.
I'm new, and here's my conversation with my brother Harry.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation is a poem called Tar, Paper, and 2x4s.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks so much. I have it on the screen for everybody watching on YouTube and stuff, so go ahead and read it. Yeah.
Years ago, I photographed you in your go-kart, framed you full center in our backyard near the ramshackle barn, chicken coops, rusty fence, tangled morning glory vines. The old print I hold now looks blacker, whiter, even more gray than the day itself. Memories should fade over decades, but the longer I let time steep, details I didn't see then focus sharper now. Emotions I didn't feel then fill me full color now. Pride holds your head still. Trust rivets your sober eyes to my face, my lens. Your dignity challenges me. Take your picture. Respect your invention. You were born to scrounge plywood scraps, axles, nuts, bolts, wheels, roof shingles, 2x4s. You were forged to hang engine blocks from trees. You were born to make things move on land and water. You grip a sisal steering rope rigged to baby carriage wheels. You brace your back and sneakers on 2x4 struts, holding up your streamlined plywood roof. Our younger brother squats in back, arms wrapped around his dungaree knees. He's poised to jump, ready to push your boy-powered hope machine on wheels, shove your wood wagon, and drag race hope. The photo testifies years you lugged hope down alleys, crashed demolition derby hope through fences, hammered and nailed hope to custom chassis, hauled hope out of our hopeless backyard.
Oh, I love that, especially the ending. Thanks for sharing that. And then we have the photo too, which I'll scroll down and show. This is the photo that inspired. Wow, that's such a great family photo. So that's why you should, everybody, if you haven't read yet, you should be watching on, or if you already read, you should be watching on YouTube because you can see the photo. But if not, go back and swing. But it's a great photo of boys playing with a kind of a race car in the backyard. That's really beautiful. And just such great memories. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I can definitely relate to that. What was that line? I love that. The crash demolition derby hope through fences. It reminds me of my little brother actually too. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
Take care. Yeah, and that was Margaret Plaganis from Hartford, Connecticut, sharing that poem, which was tar paper and 2x4s. Yeah, very nice. Let's go next to another first-time caller. Jared Campbell is here.
Hello.
Hey, Jared. Yeah, how you doing?
Yep, doing okay. So I wrote a brief history of Hiraeth, which is a Welsh word meaning nostalgia, longing, homesickness.
Uh-huh.
It can be a longing for a homeland that never was, a longing to be reunited with your homeland's culture, or it can also mean regret.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, very interesting word. Yeah, it's not one I'm familiar with, but a great, definitely very useful word again, too. And I may ask, too, where are you calling from? Because I was...
Kansas.
Ah, well, very nice. Well, thanks so much for joining the show. And yeah, I'm excited to hear this poem. Let's go ahead.
The things that fall between the sofa cushions of the brain, like the smell of straw in autumn, the wrinkles is where the knowledge is, right? The in-betweens, the lost. The euthanasia is where the knowledge is, like burning leaves and watching the Schottenheimer Chiefs lose. Fuck you. You think we'll all fucking die you think you can live forever. Just, we will come back forever. We're coming back like measles. Every time you think, I'll ride to the graveyard, I'll return to the smell of the however many gun salute, out past the pastures where we place our dead. Vaccines, autoimmunity, and the changing nature. God knew what he was doing all along. Afternoon melts into evening like affogato Wonder Bread. Hours wrinkled like New Yorker print. Fake news. Your time is wrinkled with confinement. You can't contain it. You're too small for your time, and your Puritan time has no space for you. Time has space enough for what we fill it with. Tiny bowls and tiny spoons. Time is the frown you made, accepting a Wonder Bread sandwich at Grandma's house the night before Grandpa's funeral. Love is the act of coming home. Love is an act. Fake news. Love is acting convincingly. Love is acting like it's not a chore. Did you see that? See what? She frowned at you. She frowned at you like Wonder Bread.
Oh, really interesting poem. A lot of passion there. Great reading of it, too, and a lot of energy shifting back and forth. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jared.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It was Jared Campbell with a brief history of Hiraeth. Very interesting. Yeah, and great. Hope you come back soon. All the three so far, the first-time callers have been wonderful, so hope you come back regularly. Let's go next to Zachary Honeycutt.
Hey Tim, how's it going, man?
It's good, Zachary. Yeah, it's a little snowy here. I'm a little bit worried about how much it's going to get coming down. But otherwise, it's a great day. Great day to sit around and enjoy poetry.
It's actually cold in Florida. That's why I've got this on tonight.
I don't know. How cold could it be in Florida? Are the iguanas falling out of the trees yet?
Not that cold, not that cold.
All right. So what do you got for us?
This one's a little abstract. This is actually an older poem of mine, and I made it a fellow paisano like me. A brief history of Mio Blue.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Not to rain on Carla's blue parade, but I like blue too. Blue is the tone of conversation when its chatter forms a melting pot. Whispers mixing with bolder voices, like the sparkle of sapphire in the eye, distorts perception. Blue's tone is soft, without any edges. Its nature indistinct. It's dimmer and calmer than the blue in raging seas. The distance of blue is far out of time's reach. It hovers in space where days' lives differ from those of the humble planet of blue. Blue does not play flashy games like red pines for a look. From gazes of others, their pupils jump to red while blue could hardly give a damn. Blue is the observer on the sidewalk of misanthropic stances, unable to rush through this test like the blue sea splashes the stillness from your eyes. Can't say if blue preoccupies its heart with thoughts, yet the heart of blue's beats is more in rhythm with that of a mature being. Blue must be more refined without making an announcement out of it, like that demon narcissist red. Blue is a face that gets lost within clusters, as brief as a breath. A breath is blue, a wisp of the nonchalant preamble in the constitution of my disposition. My blue fish swims across time at a child's pace. My blue unconcerned with the trends or profound details of what's going on around it.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks so much for sharing that, Zachary, that personification of blue, a brief history of Mio Blue. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, thank you guys. See you guys next time.
Yep,
Bye-bye.
take care. It was Zachary Honeycutt with a cameo. Brief history of Mio Blue. And let's go next to Nancy Tennell.
Did I do it? I did
You did. Hello, Nancy. Great to see you.
Hi there. Good to see you. I wrote a poem that is in an old French song form. I have a background in music, and because my word is French, and it's a French word that what it is slang. It's basically verlan is a French word for slang. But this particular type of slang originated in the 1800s. So I wanted to use an old French song form, and it's a poetic form, and it's a ballade.
Interesting. So what are the rules for a ballade? Do you know? Well,
Yes, you have 3 8-line stanzas, and on what I sent, it would have gone to a second page had I put an extra line between the stanzas. So I moved over, alternated moving over
a second honeycut of the night.
Yeah, I don't know if that's cheating or not. I hope not.
It's all good. It's all good. But thanks. You could have decreased the line spacing too. That would have done the same.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this is my brief history of Verlan.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, let's hear it.
In old France, there were robbers, all camouflaging their speech to be unclear. This is the way they tricked the law, and how Verlan came to be here. Verlan is l'envers, as la rhume is la mer. Reversing syllables was a code so good, it served the thieves well year after year. That's why Verlan was used and understood. French youth today now make it their call and look at the world with much less fear, for by naming what they face, they can stand tall, sit as the driver, the one who will steer their future, which they want to commandeer. They wear Verlan like a cloak and a hood. It serves the youth well year after year. That's why Verlan is used and understood. On the streets or in school, walking through the halls, when they sing their songs, Verlan will appear. In their music, they are able to say it all. If you know, you will know, and it will be clear. This secret code made just for their ears. It's their special style, language that's fluid. It serves the youth well year after year. That's why Verlan is used and understood. It serves people well to speak without fear. That's why Verlan is used and understood. It's a freedom of speech. It can't be more clear. That's why Verlan is used and understood.
Oh, that's great. An excellent treatise on on slang. Thanks so much for sharing that, Nancy.
All right, you're welcome.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really good analysis of why it actually is used. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And Verlan, I love that phrase too, or that word. All right, let's go to Brian O'Sullivan next.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Brian. Yeah, great to see you.
Good to see you. So,
Yeah, so what have we got?
I sent something called A Brief History of Pratai.
Sorry. No, yeah, I mean,
Pratai, yeah.
Every word, I have no idea what these words
Prati,
are.
actually.
I'm so
It's,
uncultured.
It's Irish for potato. Simple
Oh, okay.
word.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Big history, though. Yeah,
to
okay.
go along with your, what you've been working on a lot. Yeah, exactly.
There you
The
go.
sabbatical work.
There you go. So, yeah, a little bit at a time. It starts with an epigraph from something called the Schools Collection, which was an interesting project. They did this project in Ireland in the 1930s to try to capture like folk knowledge before it went away. And they had school children interview older people in their towns and both in Irish and in English write down those stories and preserve them. And now they're on the internet and searchable, which is really kind of neat.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So it starts with that. Mrs. James O'Mahony, Clondereen, 80 years old, made starch from potatoes in her own home 60 years ago. That is, before she was married. She peeled them, boiled them, from Pratai, an oral history taken by student T. Holland from Johanna O'Mahony as part of the school's collection. And the particle of potato starch stirred by a student's pen floated for 90 years, crossing the Atlantic, diving into the internet to find Johanna's great-grandson, who thought that her mother must have smiled when she passed on this old spell, this act of granular gra, particulate love, that almost died off when the Pratai failed in the bad times. The men had salvaged tiny sprouts growing from blighted black potatoes while the women cooed and patted the hungry babes. Now there are Pratai again, all kinds like Irish queens and evergreens, enough that Johanna could wash some and scrape them into boiling water to thicken them into starch to stiffen dignity in a collar, better than the store-bought robin starch ever could do, so that her father might hold his head high when, on a Sunday morning, his bones still aching, his boots washed as clean as they could be, he yoked ponies to a trap and drove the growing family to Roundstown, past the crumbling cottages of the departed, to sit in a pew behind the stronger farmers. And after Mass, the family would eat the pratai that Johanna and her mother made. They peeled boiled potatoes, peeled them, bruised them, and mixed them with flour to make cakes. I wonder why they bruised them, and whether bruising made them look blighted. But she peeled them, as if to strip away all that was bitter and to make smooth that which was tough in the long wake of hunger.
Oh, great. I love that, too. Thanks so much for sharing that history, Brian. It's really fascinating to, pull from sources like that to, I get to learn along with getting to enjoy some poems. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So Brian O'Sullivan, and that was A Brief History of Pratai. Let's go to Monica Dobos next.
Hi, Tim. Hi,
Hey,
everyone.
Monica. Yeah, great to see you.
I have a Romanian word here, ploaie, which comes from the Latin pluvia. And I'm not a rhyme and meter girl, but for some reason, this refrain, "My love and I," kept popping up. So, and then also I need to guard you. This is more of an experimental poem. So,
Well, you tend to experiment, so I'm not surprised. I'm looking forward to it. And I don't know. I don't mean to put down experimental poems in in the show earlier.
I get it.
I
Yeah.
like experiments when they go somewhere. I just don't like experimenting for experiment's sake. I guess I should have put it that way. All right.
Let's see if it goes anywhere. All right. A brief history of Ploie. Silver people in silken dresses fill up a silted sky. Most of them know neither where they're going nor why. By the window we watch them numb, my love and I. A mayhem of wind, leaves, dentures, cataracts, broken limbs. Some carry felines under arms. Others take their clocks for walks. Brave ones pull out arthritis from their thighs, wring it good, hang it out on blue finches to dry. The dark gray duel in forks and firebolts. Those who can still lift their arms battle each other with canes, which brings a rumble and makes coxcombs flee the weather vanes. We get the hampers out, my love and I, ready for the ladies who pull up their brimful skirts and drop the water babies. We fetch the hampers by the fire, my love and I, and name the babies Lorelei. We bless the food, the plans, the books, the kids with Lorelei, and keep a single hamper overnight between my love and I. In the morning, we take the hamper out and sprinkle sage, saffron, sugar, and pour the babies back to earth, my love and I. While pages fill with poems, we bid goodbye and thank you, Lorelei.
Oh, yeah, very beautiful. I love the internal rhyme and the repetition. Now it's all buried in there with a refrain. Thanks for sharing that, Monica.
Thank you.
Yep, take care. So Monica Dobos with a brief history of Ploie. I should have said that better, probably. Anyway, let's go next to Laura Berg.
Hi. So interesting this evening. Tim, I would actually like to read the poem from last week. I sent them both, but the one I tried for this week doesn't really grab my heart.
Okay, yeah, sure, no problem at all. Let me pull it up. Here we
It's
go.
called Mint Tea. It's the second one up there.
Yeah, I have it here. And what was the prompt last week? I should remember.
It's a conversation that you're having that's unspoken.
Oh, yeah, between... Yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's called Mint Tea, which in the dialectal Arabic is Ate Banana.
Oh.
He pours the tea from a great height, flamboyant, so it cools as it tumbles from swan neck over gold rim and into a stout glass stuffed with fresh mint that glints like pine needles. Lofty in his fez, eyes kindling above a pyramid mustache, he pours as if to say, "You are welcome," or "Nothing is as stable as it seems," or "Isn't this mint luscious?" or "Will she tip enough to cover mother's medicine?" or "That flies back on the cup," or "We are all in God's hands," or "How much longer?" and "What are the chances of surviving the crossing by sea?" But what do I know, since his life may be excellent and just as he dreams, sailing toward the next table, and I nod and smile in thanks for the healing infusion, regretful I won't ask what his gestures really mean, as I am timid, a gatherer of shreds from what I sense or read, and prefer to imagine, tilting my face into the steam.
Oh, that's a beautiful poem. I mean, I love that speculation toward the middle. It just takes off. Thanks so much for sharing that, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was Laura Berg with Mint Tea. And next in line, we have Joe Cottonwood.
Okay.
Hey, Joe.
I hope I stay on. I'm on backup power at my house.
Oh, that's hard.
Storms.
Where are you living?
I'm in La Honda.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I got a generator that already flaked out on me once, and
Oh, really? But I hope the power stays on for sure. Yeah.
Anyway, I'll give it a shot here. So it's this week's prompt I'm writing, and some of those prompts I have to scratch my head, but this one I know exactly, and I went straight to writing this. It's a personal history. I guess it comes easy. It's called A Brief History of Grazie Ciao.
Ah, interesting.
Italian, of course. A brief history of Grazie. Ciao. He writes for an Italian newspaper, asked for my comments about Amanda Knox, because this is 15 years ago when frenzied falsehoods of Amanda the murdering bitch are hot news. I say nobody in Italy would care what I think. He says people respect you here, which shows how twisted things are in Italy, where my novel about my life as a potato is popular. Okay, so I say the prosecutor is a bully with satanic fantasies who is handling Amanda the way we treat black people in Alabama. He says, grazie, ciao, thanks, and goodbye. That's the end of it, until one morning, my inbox is full of hate mail, and a reporter from CNN is calling to ask why there is a warrant for my arrest. So I contact the newspaper guy who says, defamation of a public official is not a civil case, but is a crime against the Italian state, which is prosecuted by the Italian government. And remember, Italy is a police state. You can't talk about the law the way you talk about a football, but not to worry. They can only arrest you on Italian soil, so grazie. Ciao.
Wow, what a story there, Joe. That's incredible. So you can't go to Italy, huh?
Probably not.
Wow, that's a really interesting story. One of the more interesting ones we've heard here on the Prompt Lines or the Rattlecast. Yeah, so
it was pretty weird.
That really is. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's a fun poem too. There's a Joe Cottonwood with a history of Grazia Ciao. Really interesting. Okay, Mark Grenier is up next.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Mark.
The word I got is malish from the Arabic. It's where it means, as the title says, there's nothing to it. You should have it on the submittable.
Okay, yeah, pull it up. Let me pull it up in 1 second. There we go. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
A brief history of malish. There's nothing to it. Borrowed from classical Persian. That's supposedly the derivation. It's okay, I'd say. It's not important. Tossed off in the street outside our gate, I might hear it several times a day. Our maid would say malish when she didn't want us to fuss about something we thought might bother her, or the yard boy, or the baker downtown where we bought bread. Spoken gently with a negligent wave, I'd heard it 1,000 times in the 2 years we spent in Libya. What does it mean? Almost anything, I think. As is commonly the case with common words and languages spoken by millions of people in far too many places where different cultures shape our all too common misunderstanding.
Oh, yeah, another really interesting poem with a great word, malish. That's one we can definitely use, too. Thanks for sharing that, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Mark Grenier with a brief history of malish. There's nothing to it. Mary Lisa Didominicius is up next. Hey, Mary Lisa. Are you there? Oh, there you go. Hello. Are you there? Oh, it might be breaking up.
It's been a while.
Hey, maybe turn off your.
Am I breaking
Mary Lisa,
up?
maybe turn off your camera because it's really choppy. Maybe if it's just the audio.
Am I
will work
breaking
better.
up?
Yeah.
Wait, I have to get the Zoom back up.
Oh, it's
Sorry.
okay. Oh, actually, we got you now. Whatever you did worked, so I'm not sure what happened, but you're here.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah,
I
you're
won't
good now. Mhm. So how you doing?
I'm well. Enjoying the prompts, but they are challenging, I must say. This one is in response to a silent interaction. So, and I know you have a lot of people waiting, so I'll try to be
Okay,
fast.
did
That
you
dog.
is it on the submissions or the email?
Oh, did you find it through the email?
Through the email. Maybe I missed it. Let's see. There's a bunch in the inbox, so I'm trying to dig through email. There we go. I found it. Okay. Yep, got it. Go ahead. That dog, right?
Yes, that
Okay.
dog. All right. When we begin to moan, that dog comes in to see my body arched on top or cradled dark below your body. But he turns, he goes, as though he knows it isn't pain I'm singing. Even when, with all my might, I thrust my body hard against you, down upon you. Even when with force you throw your body into mine. He somehow knows we mean no harm. Despite that pleasure on the face can be mistaken, mimic pain. That dog is certain when he enters of one thing he might not know just listening to our antics from the next room. Knows by seeing how we pay him no attention. Knows not looking is a way to not invite another in. And we don't. And he doesn't interrupt us. Still, I'd like a door put in between us.
That's great. We had another poem similar back in the day called Canis Interruptus, I remember by...
Oh!
Yeah, it's really funny. So that's a great poem for interaction with a stranger. Very fun place to take it. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mary Lisa.
Thank you.
As Mary Lisa did have an issue with that dog. All right, let's go next to Jayanthi Rangan. We have a few people left. There's like 4 people left, maybe. Hey, Jayanthi. Are you there?
Hi, Tim. I'm so sorry it took some time to correct the Zoom.
Oh, no problem at all. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun listening to the show. Today I have written this poem called A Brief History of Ras Bluyuto. Yeah, it's a Russian word. Basically, what it means is a relationship where the romance, it once had romance, but now the romance is gone. So whatever is left.
Interesting. Like a nostalgia for the romance, maybe, or something.
I mean the good feelings are still there, but the romance is missing.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
that's what it does.
That's a useful word too, for sure. Okay, well, let's hear it. Yeah, that's a useful word, I think. Another one.
Yeah, a romance flame once, but now a snuffed leftover. At first, his patter pulse jumped out of his skin, melted his mind at her presence around. A biochemistry's equation that looks balanced, like a synthetic meal fortified with vitamins. Both craved run-ins, both hopeful for each other's sightings. Finally, a Super Bowl party of yelling at TV, a few dinners and a few walks. Then a college in a different city kept the relationship easygoing. They remained pals with anemic zeal. Their hormones found detours. The fizz escaped the soda like a hydrogen molecule's flingy bond. The lone electrons danced a romance orbit, then drifted apart without rancor.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Great illumination of that interesting word. Very useful. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was Jayanthi Rangan with a brief history of Ras Bluyuto, I guess you'd say. Thanks for sharing that, Jayanthi.
Thank you.
Let's see, Brent Stauffer is next. Brent hasn't been on in a while. Hey, Brent, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey,
hi,
yeah,
everybody.
great to see you. Yeah, it's been a bit.
yeah, it has been a bit. A band that I'm in had to pull some rehearsals on Monday nights, and so I was I was outvoted. Couldn't get out of it.
Well, no hard feelings. What's the band's name, by the way?
Yeah.
What's the band's name?
Yeah, it's called Partial to Mabel.
Interesting. And what kind of music is it?
Yeah. It's a well, my favorite description of this has been psychograss.
Interesting. I like that description. Yeah.
It's kind of bluegrass jam band
Mm-hmm.
type stuff.
Well, that sounds really fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you got for a word poem this week?
Okay, well, I found this word saudade, which is a Portuguese word that doesn't have a direct translation into English, but it means a melancholic yearning for someone or something that you probably will not encounter again. And it is it's supposedly it's a big part of the Portuguese mindset and worldview. And in Brazil, they actually have a day set aside just for that, just for everybody to get all nostalgic for something that can't be ever again.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's a great word.
And it comes from all if you go all the way back, it comes from Latin, a Latin word for solitude. But it first shows up in the 13th century, which comes up in a poem, and then also in Portugal was a big major world superpower for a while. And I forget when this happened. I think it was in the Middle Ages or something, that there was this earthquake, and it brought down all these buildings, and it started all these fires. So first you had the earthquake that destroyed a lot of buildings. Then you had this fire. Then they got hit by a tidal wave that the earthquake had created offshore.
Wow.
And it was just devastating for them.
Wow, I had no idea that's how the Portuguese Empire ended. I always wondered why, it's such a small country now. Yeah, that's interesting.
It must have had something to do with it.
Yeah.
But that shows up in the poem too. So the most popular kind of saudade is romantic in nature. So that's where I went with it.
Okay.
A brief. Let me try again. A brief history of saudade. Standing in an empty room, well-worn love letters shoved in my jacket pocket, I watch the sun's vibrant demise flare behind the darkening downtown office buildings. I've been looking for a photo of you, dancing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, a jig of goofy joy. Did I tell you then I'd miss you now, like a 13th century Portuguese troubadour mumbling into his wine cup? Let the earth shift her shoulders. Let the villages burn down. Let the tidal wave come. The pale curtain billows in front of the open window like a beckoning, but also lets in the smell of honeysuckle from the vacant lot, shrouded in growing shadow. I stand in solitude only when I forget to remember you.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love the ending, especially that turn to the honeysuckle is great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Brett.
Yeah, there's the one other element of the saudade that I forgot to mention, and that it's bitter, but it's also sweet.
Yeah.
That it's not unenjoyable, the saudade.
Yeah, that makes it a great word. Yeah, saudade. Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Tim.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, Brent. So Brent Stoff with the brief history of saudade. And I think Bishwajit Mishra might be the last on the Zoom. Yeah. Hey, Biz. How you doing tonight?
Hey, Tim. Good evening. You guys had a lot of rain. Now you're talking about snow. That's what I was reading.
I'm at 6,000 feet. So the rain, if it rains down there, it snows. Fortunately, it rained first and then snowed later. So it's not, it would be like 8 feet of snow. So we don't want 8 feet. We had a 7-foot storm last year, and I don't want to repeat that. So it's like, it was a bunch of rain, then maybe a foot of snow on top of it. So it's not too bad.
Oh, okay. Okay. I wish you all the best to get through it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, but we'll get through it. We're used to it up here. We're tough mountain folk.
Yeah, true.
Hey, so we got what do we have for you this week?
I sent you 2 emails actually. If you will please open the second one that says V1 or something, because this one I was struggling a little bit. So
well, that's okay.
And okay, so this is I have just used a very colloquial word from my language, Odia. And it's not like a literary word. This is a very colloquial word there that's used. So it's called a brief history of Deula Mundi. Means a temple finial, the crown of the temple.
Yeah, very interesting. And do you want to look at the picture first? Should we share that first, or should I wait?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a beautiful picture. I love that. Yeah.
This is a temple, very famous. It's called Konark Temple. It's famous for the sculptures, wooden sculptures, and they got very what you call that, the coital postures of so they have been but they're really very beautifully done, and they're very intricate work. But this is only the face of the temple. I mean, the entrance of the temple. The main temple has fallen apart, so that'll come in the poem. It's all broken down. So this is based on a legend.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's hear it.
A brief history of Deula Mundi. Standing by the growing riverside, with the sea swashing its reap tide, 1,200 masons tried, and kept failing to fix the Mundi. A boy of 12 comes to the side, to his father who's been out of sight, building a temple, worried day and night. No temple's complete without a Mundi. Young Dharmapada offers to climb, and does install the Mundi in time, but the 1,200 still whine, if the king found who tied the Mundi. The gorging river and the loud sea, cloud of 1,200's worry, shades the sun and moon falls in deep. To end their trauma, he jumps off the Mundi. As a kid, I learned a thing or two. One, you could make a name too, shitting on road or building a temple new. Yet Dharma is lost building the Mundi. Now the roaring river is gone, even the sea is withdrawn, also the temple, the god's son, and gone with it the Mundi. The ruins are left with stone figurines, sure a beauty, never before seen, but Dharma is left in books of magazines, telling kids the story of the Mundi. So I put a little bit of write-up there. So basically there were 1,200 masons who were erecting it, and his father was the leader, but they could not fix the finial on the top. And he came to see his father. Somehow he knew it, and he went and fixed it. And then they started crying, the king is going to flay us if he finds that we couldn't do it. So he jumped off.
Wow.
And the river, there was a river which is dried, which is not there. And the sea used to be very close to the temple. Now it's withdrawn. So that's why.
Oh yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I love when things I didn't know anything about come into poems and you get to learn stuff. That was really fun. Thanks for sharing that, Bishop.
Okay.
I love the form too. What's the form called?
I use that that's a Chopadi, because I wrote a free form. Then I went. That's how I was struggling. I said this is a very old story. It's a legend. It's a very traditional story the way. So if I could match it with a traditional form, so that's why I was struggling. Because you have a reference, then you lose a line there.
Well, that's great. You did a great job, and a really fun story. Thanks for sharing it.
Okay, thanks. Good night.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was Bishop Mishra with a brief history of Deula Mundi. Very interesting. Yeah. All right, so that's going to wrap up the Zoom, I think. Yeah. And, there are other people who send in poems, but this is one of those weeks where we're not going to be able to read extra poems. So maybe save them, come in on the Zoom next week if you were hoping I'd read one for you. Let's go quickly to the Sciku for the week. And the Sciku for this week is based on this article right here, which I shall pull up. We were watching Finding Dory with the kids on Saturday, I think it was. And so this caught my eye originally, and I think it was in, where did I see it? Science Daily or something. But then it's from the, what is it from? The, well, it's OIST. There it is. The Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology. That's what this is from. And the story is right here, and it is this. Here we go. It is, Yeah, I thought I made it small enough. There we go. Clownfish seem to be counting bars and laying down the law. New research suggests that the fish may be counting vertical bars on intruders to determine their threat level and to inform the social hierarchy governing the sea anemone colonies. So the very interesting thing about clownfish is they sort of like live in these sea anemones. Anemones? Am I saying that right? And they kind of like guard it, and like it's like little like condos or something for the clownfish. And they let other clownfish in, but not if you're not part of their family. And they let other species in kind of freely though. But if you're a different clownfish family, the alpha male comes in and chases you out. And what's interesting is that they did all these little experiments using different models with like stripes, you know? And so they realized in a previous study that clownfish actually respond to vertical stripes, but not horizontal stripes. Now they found out that the clownfish are more aggressive to extra stripes. So the more stripes you have, the more the clownfish is going to get mad if you approach his sea anemone thing. And it's like they use these various techniques to kind of show that they were actually like counting the stripes. It wasn't just like the amount of like whiteness in the surface area or the ratio or something. It was actually like 1, 2, 3 stripes was like much more of a threat to them because the bigger fish have more stripes. So they kind of count the stripes. So that is the science story inspired by Finding Dory. And the Sciku inspired by that is this right here. Weekends hitting another bar, clownfish. That's weekends hitting another bar, clownfish. That is your Sciku for this week. And now let's go to Katie Dozier, who is still here. And we will talk a little bit about next week's prompt. Hey, Katie.
Hey, and shout out to Lizzie, who's watching on my iPad in the kitchen.
Hey, Lizzie. Yeah, I'm sure doing some art at the same time, probably.
Yes, she is. She is making, I think, a dragon head thing. So, yes.
Yeah, well, looking forward to seeing you again tomorrow, Lizzie. So, yeah, thanks for watching the show. Another viewer.
And she was like, what's that number by the Rattlecast? And I was like, that's how many shows Tim has done. And she was like, whoa.
Yeah, although she's probably done more shorts, though.
I don't know, though. She's interested. She asked if we could go back and watch the first one after we finish this tonight. So the first Rattlecast.
Well, that's a little embarrassing. Go ahead. And Lizzie, though, do hit the like button. So if you're still watching, anybody, including Lizzie, make sure to hit the like button to make sure poetry is spread around the internet. That'd be much appreciated. So anyway, so I don't know if you wrote down the prompt because we were talking about it. So you don't, but I did. I don't even know if you know how I phrased it though. So you picked it.
We went back and forth because also we wanted to originally incorporate 32 because of 32 poems, but then we didn't because we'd just done one that was limiting it to a page.
I think I did though. I put it down there. Oops. Yeah. So this was, we can have short poems still. This was write a song of someone or something as a persona poem, less than 32 lines long. Maybe should we say exactly 32 lines?
Oh, exactly 32. I think we're going to get people really forcing that form and like
but maybe it's interesting to play with it though. Like maybe it'll create some imagination. What do you think?
Maybe it will. Okay.
Do you want to do it? You can say no. You're the prompt poems editor.
Let's do 32 lines, but if you like, you'll do 32 lines and you'll make it work, people. I believe we're ready for challenges.
We have faith. They're great poets all over.
Yeah, the harder the prompts, the better the poems, honestly, is how it feels. I mean, tonight's poems were incredible.
They really
were. So good.
Yeah. Great poems all around. So here is the prompt then. I'll put it on the screen. Write a song of someone or something as a persona poem, 32 lines long. That is the prompt for this week. So, and that'll make sure that people are actually writing it too, or at least editing something into a 32-line poem. Yeah. And that was, of course, George David Clark had those several poems in the book. Which you want to go back and read those, which were Song of the Guardian Angel, Song of the Imaginary Friend, Song of the Genie. So he's got these songs of things. So you can do a song of something, and that'll be the prompt for this week. A lot of fun.
And I think we should say, too, it doesn't have to be titled Song of, at least was my vision for it, because I know we just did the prompt that was, dictating the title. So it can be, it is a song, but you don't have to tell us it's a song. Or you can be like Taylor Swift and tell everyone that you're a poet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can't see, but I did not put quotes around song of. It's just a statement right there.
Okay.
So just Song of Someone
Okay,
or
good.
Something as a persona poem, 32 lines long. So we'll see what people do with that. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. It'll also be interesting if somebody actually wants to nitpick and count that it's exactly 32 lines, because I will not be doing that. So I will trust you blindly.
It could be a 32 lines minus one. All right. So so thanks so much for picking that out, Katie, and thanks for doing all this great stuff you do too.
Thanks for the great show. It was really wonderful tonight.
Okay. Well, good night.
Night.
Yeah, so that was Katie Dozier, our prompt poems editor, and that was your prompt for this week. And of course, the prompt lines submissions are open now. We always wait a couple days, so there's like a nice demarcation. We do that for the Frasted Challenge too, just because otherwise you get confused over which one's which. Like people, you wouldn't think, but if you open the deadline, the day after, people submit for the old one, even though it's past the deadline, and then you get so confused. And so it just opened up again. So you can submit your poems, either your poems for this week, which was the brief history of things, or next week's prompt, write a song of someone or something as a persona poem, 32 lines long. So that'll be a lot of fun. Now, next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Joshua Eric Williams. Now, so you might remember Joshua Eric Williams. We nominated a haiku for a Pushcart Prize last year, and that haiku didn't win a Pushcart Prize, sadly, but it did go on to win a Touchstone Award from the Haiku Foundation, is one of the best 3, I think they give, haiku of the entire year. And then Red Moon Press published a book called Silent After by Joshua Eric Williams, where that is one of the poems in the book, but of course many other wonderful haiku in that book. So we're looking forward to talking haiku again next week. We'll explore it again with Joshua Eric Williams, other stuff he does too. He's a really interesting guy. That's going to be Rattlecast number 232 with your songs of someone or something. Monday, February 12th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I'll talk to you later. Good night.